Mr. Chairman, it's 1 o'clock. Like, as I mentioned, we've got a quorum, so I'd say let's get started.
All right. Well, everyone, this is Doug Boyd, your newly elected chairman, and this is the 71st annual spring meeting of Gulf States Marine Fisheries Commission. The date is March 17th, 2001, 1 p.m. Central Time, and it's St. Patrick's Day for anyone who's Irish. Dave, we've got a quorum, you stated, so I'll call the meeting to order, and I'm going to keep this very informal, if that's all right with y'all. Unless there's an objection, it's okay if we use first names, and the dress code is whatever you have on. We have an agenda that has been published. Is there anyone who'd like to add to the agenda or correct the agenda at this point?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to add under other business a discussion of the Young Fishermen's Program update that Ashford provided us, and I emailed last week. Just a kind of a quick talk. And then before we proceed, I've got a couple of things I want to say before we just kind of housekeeping stuff.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so other business, young fisherman comments and presentation. Any other changes in the agenda? All right, I'd accept a motion to approve the agenda.
This is Scott. I so move.
All right, a second.
This is Reed. I second.
All right, all in favor? Well, let's do it this way. Any opposed to approving the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Minutes were in the briefing packet. Are there any corrections to the minutes? All right, I'd accept a motion to approve the minutes.
This is Reed. So moved.
And a second, please.
With Scott, I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Anyone opposed to approving the minutes? Hearing none, minutes are approved. So we'll move to item number 4, standing committee reports. Dave, and you had some comments before that, right?
Yeah, yes, please. So some of you may know I've got some sad news. A longtime commissioner and a past Lyle Simpson Award winner, John Ray Nelson, recently passed away. He was on the commission for a number of years before his son Chris Nelson took his position. And I talked to Chris last week. His service is actually today. So I'd like to have a moment of silence for him and to keep Chris and his families in your thoughts and prayers. So if we could. So I appreciate that. Another item is about the meeting. Just, we've all become experts in online meetings, despite our hesitancy to do. But just a couple of things. If you're not talking, please mute your line so we don't get any feedback. To talk, as Chairman Boyd mentioned, we're fairly informal here. So either just begin to talk when there's a break, or you can put something in the chat option that you'd like to say something. When you do say something, please state your name so we know who's talking. And for audience members, this is a public meeting, so you're allowed to ask a question or have a comment if you'd like. But we ask that you put something in the chat option, just so we know that you've got a question or comment. So as you mentioned, we do have a quorum, so that is a good thing. And then the last thing, I wanted to recognize several of the commission employees that recently reached a major milestone. Cheryl Noble, who's our administrative assistant, just passed her 30 years of service with the commission. And then Angie Rabideau, our senior accountant, just passed 10 years of service with the commission. They've helped advance the commission's objectives, and I've enjoyed working with both of them, and look forward to doing it into the future. So please give them a round of applause for their dedication and years of service. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I will turn it over to you to start with the standing committee reports.
All right, Dave. Am I unmuted? Just to make sure.
Yep,
Can you hear me? Okay. Standing committee reports, Law Enforcement Committee.
Yeah, Jason Downey here with Alabama Marine Resources. I'm the co-chair for the Law Enforcement Committee. I'm going to provide you a report on the joint LEC-LATC virtual meeting that was held on March 9th. The joint LEC-LATC meeting was called to order at 10:30 a.m. with 2 actions for the commission. Several items were covered specific to the Gulf Council's LATC, which included a report from Rich Malinowski on the Southeast for Hire electronic reporting program. Dr. Laster reviewed Amendment 32 COBIA, the lane snapper, and changes to accountability measures. And we discussed issues related to the illegal charters. The LEC approved the 2021 through 2024 strategic plan and the 2021 through 2022 operations plan, which is included as tab B and C in your briefing books. Any changes are identified in red text along with the explanation of why the change was made. We can take up those 2 items now or at the completion of my report. Vendor Corps reported on the IJF program activities. Due to the pandemic, progress on the red drum profile has been very slow. Scott Pierce from the FWC sits on the task force representing enforcement. Vendor Corps plans to initiate a reboot of this effort in the next few weeks. In addition, the pandemic has also impeded the progress of forming the new Mangrove Snapper Task Force. Establishment of this group will take place later this year. Written reports were provided by the individual states and agencies in advance, and highlights were discussed. In Alabama, Downey noted that the department was attempting to fill some positions. They transferred 1 officer in and hired 4 new, but then lost a couple, which put them back down on enforcement staff again. They will do more hiring soon. Louisiana noted that the department spent fewer hours this past year on JA enforcement due to so much time being spent on hurricane and disaster preparedness. The U.S. Coast Guard provided a few updates as IUU continues to be the lead issue the U.S. Coast Guard is dealing with. Launches take up a lot of patrol and interception time off South Texas. So far, they have interdicted 41 vessels to date for 2021. Last year, they were unable to detain a number of the individuals they interdicted because of COVID. They do continue to cooperate in joint enforcement operations with their Gulf partners. NOAA OLE reported that NOAA has had some staff changes since Tracy Dunn retired in December, and Antonaris has taken over as a SAC. There are several new positions that will be filled soon, which include 2 near the U.S.-Mexico border, as well as a number of locations around Florida. Scarper indicated that another officer will be hired for the North Central Gulf as well. There have been some excellent cases coming out of the Gulf thanks to the cooperation with partners, including the U.S. Coast Guard, to increase enforcement. Having no further business to discuss, the meeting adjourned at 12:55 p.m. And that's the conclusion of my report.
Thank you, Jason. Next on the list is the Technical Coordinating Committee, and I believe that's going to be Darren.
Hold on there, Chairman Boyd. Jason, didn't you have two actions for the commission for us to approve the plans? Jason?
This is Steve. Yeah, we had the updated strategic plan, the 4-year and the 2-year operations plan were approved by the LEC and need to be approved by the commission.
Okay. So, Chairman Boyd, we need a motion to accept those two documents.
All right, does Jason need to read that into the minutes?
Jason?
I'm here now. I was on mute. Sorry. What do you guys need me to read in?
The motion that the LEC made about accepting the documents.
Okay, so someone needs to make a motion to approve the strategic plan and the operations plan.
Correct.
Is there anyone that would like the motion to approve the 2021 through 2024 strategic plan?
So this is Scott. I move that we accept that.
All right, do we have a second?
This is Robin, I'll second.
All right, we have a motion on the board. It has been seconded. Is there any opposition to this motion? Hearing none, motion's approved. Dave, anything else on law enforcement?
Yeah, next we need someone to make a motion to approve the 2021 through 2022 operations plan.
Okay.
This is Scott. I'll make the motion we approve the 21 through 2022 operations plan.
Okay, and a second.
I'll second again. This is Robin.
All right, motion's been made and seconded. Is there any opposition to the motion? Hearing none, motion's approved.
And then, Mr. Chairman, we need just a motion to accept the committee report.
Okay. All right. I'll accept the motion.
This is Reed, so moved.
And a second.
This is Scott. I'll second.
All right, motion's been made and seconded to approve the committee report. Any opposition? Hearing none, motion's approved. Dave, anything else on law enforcement?
Oh, we're good to go. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to item 4B, Technical Coordinating Committee, and that's Darren.
Y'all hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
All right. So I'm Darren Topping with the Texas Parks and Wildlife. We met this morning in the Technical Coordinating Committee. And first off, we had Tashara Matthews from the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. She provided a brief overview of offshore renewable wind energy in the Gulf of Mexico. And the first task force meeting will be held on June 15th, 2021. And the call for information will be published on June 25th, 2021 as well, with a 45-day public comment period. We also had Jamie Reinhardt. He presented information on the Deepwater Horizon restoration priorities and facilitated an interactive discussion to get feedback from the group on restoration priorities across the Gulf. And the TCC provided their input on priorities and scope of restoration projects for different regions in the Gulf. Marcus Dryman also updated us on the results of the Great Red Snapper count. And following his presentation, we had some discussion, some questions, and he also went over how this will be incorporated into future SOC assessments. Jeff Rester presented the TCC with a CMAP 2021 to 2025 management plan and sought the group's approval for this document. The TCC made a motion, and I so move, to approve the CMAP 2021-2025 management plan as written and send it to the full commission for approval. So this will be distributed to the commissioners by email if you find that appropriate for approval. Steve Vanderkoy presented the IJF research funding as well, and different projects in the states. He'll be providing some detail later in this program report under agenda item 12A. So let's hear more about that. The subcommittees also gave their reports. This crab subcommittee, Jason Sachier, reported the primary focus of the session in the crab subcommittee was interact with the Diamondback Terrapin Work Group, or the DTWG, and share the status of their research for crabs and terrapins. Members of the DTWG updated the subcommittee on activities related to terrapins, while the subcommittee members provided their own information related to crabbing efforts, bycatch, and TEDs. The two groups will try to meet again in the future. The derelict crab trap recovery programs were also discussed by representatives from each of the Gulf states, outlining their respective programs and how they may be affected by COVID. Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas all held recent cleanups for crab traps, while Alabama has not yet held one and is still trying to decide on when the next one might be. And Florida has gone to an every other year schedule, switching between the East and West Coast for the crab trap cleanup. The subcommittee will explore updating the 2001 white paper on derelict crab traps to document how the various state programs have changed and where they are now. Each state updated the subcommittee on blue crab landings and regulatory changes in their state. Some states saw declines in landings, possibly due to COVID or other weather-related issues that they discussed, while some experienced increases. And Florida remains stable, while Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas all saw declines in blue crab landings for the years of data that were currently available. Texas has one regulatory proposal on the table this year for opening a previously closed area of Aransas Bay to allow for pier-based crabbing, where they can only have a crab trap attached to a piling or dock or bulkhead. And while Florida FWC has been petitioned to implement statewide use of TEDs, FWC will conduct more studies and bring them back to the commission. Harriet Perry participated in the group and was recognized as our current selections from last year's Lyle Simpson Award. Perry asked about willingness to continue development of indices of abundance for states to keep an eye on trends, and all reps indicated that they would likely provide graphs from their respective states at the fall meeting to allow the group to track trends moving forward. In the molluscan shellfish, Steve Vanderkoy reported that the subcommittee heard two presentations on oyster restoration projects related to Pew Charitable Trust. And the first presentation was on an oyster inventory model that explored what tools currently exist to address oyster restoration needs in the Gulf, which includes a database of over 35 existing oyster models. The second presentation described an inventory of oyster restoration projects in the Gulf with the intention to determine how successful these restoration projects were once completed and will they be sustained. The subcommittee also discussed the current rules by state for the importation of live shells or for broodstock or seed in the region. There's a concern that the availability in some states may be limited due to strict rules on sourcing of broodstock and certification requirements. Caitlin Young discussed the Restore Science program at NOAA, updated the subcommittee on ongoing progress for NOAA Restore letters of intent, which several states have been included in. The goal is for the management and academic communities to work together. Applications are currently being reviewed and awards should be announced for early summer. The subcommittee continued discussions on how landings are reported differently by states to the ISSC and NOAA for aquaculture product versus traditional harvested oysters. The group considered ways to standardize reporting, and this may be a topic that requires further discussion by the subcommittee at future meetings. The group also participated in an afternoon session focused on oyster hatcheries across the Gulf. A broad range of hatchery-related topics were discussed, including problems with oyster seed production, how problems were overcome, and future production in the upcoming year. The subcommittee plans to continue hatchery discussions in the future through the GSMFC. In the CMAP subcommittee, Jeff Resser explained the subcommittee discussed the future of the vertical longline survey and whether the data produced for the survey remains relevant to current fisheries management. With decreases in funding, CMAP will not be able to continue to sample at current levels. Additionally, the majority of the data produced from the survey is centered around red snapper. However, the red snapper stock assessments do not utilize this data in their analysis. Changes should be considered, such as design or to start habitat mapping. CMAP does not plan to change the vertical line survey this year, but would like to continue to discuss these issues and analyze the data to best determine the best path forward. Since CMAP did not conduct the normal surveys last year, there are unused FY 2020 funds that must be spent by the end of the year. The subcommittee discussed plans to spend the remaining funds, such as equipment purchases, acoustic cameras, paying for ship time, habitat mapping, comparative studies, and vessel repairs and upgrades. All CMAP partners intend to participate in all CMAP surveys this year with COVID protocols remaining in place on board all CMAP vessels. The subcommittee recommended that all work group gets together to review the operations manual and protocols before sampling this year. In the FIN committee, there was no report. However, the FIN committee has not yet met this spring, but they plan to have an in-person meeting or a hybrid virtual meeting sometime this summer, as they've had some discussions that they thought better left to face-to-face format. And that concludes my report.
All right, thank you, Darren. You did have a motion in your report. Would you, I'm assuming you want to make that motion. Would you restate that for the record?
Well, I'd say there's I had a motion to approve, yes, this CMAP management plan. That was the motion we approved in the TCC, and I believe that they're going to send out the management plan to y'all, and then for approval, possibly by email or something like that.
Okay, Dave, is that something we're going to wait on to do?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, because the document was approved this morning, we haven't had a chance to distribute it to the commission. So we'll send it out for you guys to review and do it via email. I mean, it should be it's a fairly easy procedure. So I think that's probably the best way to proceed.
Okay, all right. Okay, anything else for the Technical Coordinating Committee? If not, we'll move on to number 4C, which is State Federal Fisheries Management Committee. Scott, are you doing that?
I believe Steve's going to pull my slack on that.
Okay.
And actually, Trevor Moncrief is going to give the Menhaden Committee report. I believe Trevor is on. Yeah, Trevor's still on. So.
Yep. Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
All right. So the MAC met virtually on Tuesday morning, March 2nd, with only one action item. The election of the chair was deferred from the fall due to some questions about whether a proxy could be elected or if it must be the member itself. Since the rotation moves from federal, state to industry, it was Mississippi's turn in the rotation. And the MAC moved to have the Mississippi representative serve as the chair until the end of the October meeting in 2021. Ray Marock of NOAA provided a review for the 2020 Gulf fishing season. In 2020, 3 Gulf plants fished 33 vessels, with 28 of those vessels being regular boats and 5 being run boats. Last year's season was marked by unprecedented hurricane season and the global pandemic. Therefore, effort in 2020 was down about 13.6% from the previous year, and landings were down 15%, coming in at 413,855 metric tons. Ray Marock also forecasted that with similar effort and conditions in 2021 as 2020, the landings in this coming season should be around 424,500 metric tons. So right on track with what the fisheries has been doing. In the Atlantic, Ray reported that There was one factory on the Atlantic coast at Reedville, and the fleet only landed 124,600 metric tons of the 216,000 metric tons available in 2020, which was a decrease of 17% from the previous year. Jason Adrians from LBWF also provided an update on the index of abundance for Menhaden and Louisiana waters. And this was for the seine, trawl, and gillnet. And in general, the index of abundance has remained stable, if not increasing, and the gillnet index has increased substantially, potentially due to increasing open water and the reduction in marsh habitat available. This is certainly a problem, and Louisiana is doing their best to attempt restoration for those areas. Steve also provided a timeline that he and Dr. Amy Schuler came up with for the Gulf Menhaden assessment update, which will occur this summer. The states are prepared to provide their fishery independent data by June 1st, and then the MAC will schedule a series of conference calls to go over the updated data and prepare for a base round of the assessment. It is hoped that the assessment will be ready for an in-person MAC meeting in October, and the assessment should have a 2020 terminal year. Steve also referred back to the previous harvest control rule work that had been done by Doug Butterworth and others, and the stakeholder input meetings the commission held working to develop a harvest control rule. Since this pandemic, that effort has not moved forward. He also pointed out that Dave Shigaris and company are doing some work that we may be able to use in the assessment from their ecosystem modeling. Dr. Schuler will touch base with Dave to see if there has been any progress potentially include on this ecosystem side. Peter Hemchak explained that the year one client action plan for the Gulf Menhaden, sorry, I got a child screaming. All right. Explained that the year one client action plan for the Gulf Menhaden MSC certification is due April 22nd. Peter has had to reconstruct the meetings and documents that go back through January of 2019, which started with the first stakeholder meeting in January 2019. The industry is trying to find a funding mechanism now to move forward with a digital data portal to operationalize Butterworth's algorithm for the harvest control rule and the reference point work. Peter noted concern that the state seemed to view the MSC certification as a marketing tool rather than an application for management, and suggested that a conference call with the states to address the importance of the portal project may be needed to find a way to fund it. Steve explained that the way the IJF funds are currently allocated, state agencies can determine what their priority needs are within their own state. They can still fund the project, but it will be up to the industry to petition the states to show the value of the portal for management purposes. Francois Cattell provided a short update on the NOAA Bycatch Steering Committee work and stated that they have had 5 meetings so far. The committee is still trying to settle on how they're going to observe the boat's activity efficiently. The primary focus is to document marine mammal interactions and bycatch in the Menhaden fleet. At this point, the committee will take 2 or 3 NOAA reps out on an alternative platform so they can view fishing activities for a week or so to determine the best way to locate cameras to observe pumping activities as well as the potential use of drones. NOAA is working through some regulations and policies that they would have to see when they would be able to travel if they get the alternative platform, and whether they will be able to move from that alternative platform onto the steamers to make direct observations. Cattell has offered an ex-Coast Guard boat owned by Dave Brook to be used to start out with that alternative platform. Dr. Robert Leaf reported that he had received some funding from SIMFIS, which is a science and industry collaboration to use the archive mark recapture data that he has already digitized and recreated with some work from Aaron Holtz to estimate Gulf Menhaden total mortality rates for the stock from 1977 to 1987. Preliminary work will be available, and a report will be available for the April SIMFIS meeting. This is one of the highest priorities from the previous assessment. And then finally, if the child will let me finish up, Former NOAA Representative Joe Smith attended the webinar, which is a good thing to see. And everyone agreed it was great to see him and hopes he continues doing well in his retirement. And then with no other business, the webinar adjourned at 10:55 a.m. and that concludes my report.
All right, thank you, Trevor. Dave, any other comments on that report?
We just need a
Motion to
motion
approve?
to accept that report.
All right, I'll accept a motion to accept that report.
Can I ask Trevor to read that again for us? No, motion to approve. This is Reed.
So Joe, I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion that's been made and seconded. Any opposition to the motion? Hearing none, motion is approved. And we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is number 5, listening session. And I believe that's going to be Paul or Heather or both.
Paul's on the phone, on screen too. Thank you for the opportunity to connect today. We good to go on this agenda item?
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you. I just signed on a second ago and really appreciate the opportunity to be on your agenda today. And really good to see you all, even in very small form on my screen. I really enjoy the opportunities to attend some of your meetings in person, and really looking forward to a future not too far off from now where we'll be able to do that again. That's a much nicer way to do business for sure. But glad we're keeping things going in the meantime, as everybody is, and doing the best we can virtually. So we're here today on a pretty big job. That's to hear from you on a task that we got from a new executive order by President Biden, this executive order 14008, on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. And this has a specific provision in it in section 216C, not to sound bureaucratic, but it's a long memo and you gotta kind of find your way through it. And there's a piece in there where we are asked, the secretary is asked through NOAA to start efforts in the first 60 days, which we've done. And this is part of that. And our job is to collect input from fishermen, regional ocean councils, fishery management councils, scientists, and other stakeholders on how to make fisheries and protected resources more resilient to climate change. So this includes changes in management and conservation measures and improvements in science, monitoring, and cooperative research. So just read in directly from that charge that we have, and it relates to a pretty encompassing, it's in the context of a pretty encompassing effort, both in this executive order and through other channels where the administration has clearly set out to understand and do what they can to better manage the effects of climate change across all sectors in the United States. And we know as well, if not better than anyone, what the sort of progression of climate looks like, from fisheries, protected resources, habitats, ecosystems affected by climate change. There is tons of research and observations to point to that this is a very present issue in different measure and in different ways in different parts of the country. And we have a big challenge to better understand climate-related changes in ocean ecosystems. Warming oceans, acidification, sea level rise, we're all dealing with changes in the distribution and abundance of marine species and everybody that depends on them. And how that is clearly affecting our world in a very substantial way in terms of figuring how best to manage these resources under rapidly changing and very thoroughly changing circumstances. So it's a big part of our job at NOAA to work with external partners to understand and respond to changing climate and ocean conditions, and work on this whole process of minimizing impacts, adapting, and ensuring at the end of the day, well, what we're all put here to do is ensure that future generations can enjoy the benefits of healthy marine ecosystems. That's what our whole enterprise here is all about, and that's what we work with you so closely on. So the commissions in particular, kind of first order target, if you will, for us to get to you and hear your views. The interstate commissions are absolutely integral partners in our whole way of doing business and our management structure, bringing together states, tribes, NGOs, and fishermen to make sure that federal regulations are appropriate for managed species, the industry and the public. And couldn't say it loudly enough that your expertise is what we need. It's absolutely paramount in determining how to answer this kind of question we've been put to, and how at the end of the day we can sustain resilient fisheries and protected resources, as hard as that job is under any circumstances. So today's an opportunity to hear from you. We've got an hour, as I understand, to get your perspectives on this, as noted, potential changes in management and conservation measures that could be affected, improvements in science monitoring, cooperative research, whatever you see, keeping in mind that we've got a lot of authorities. Some of our core authorities are affected by this line of inquiry, this executive order, what we're asked to take on here today. Our core Magnuson work, our Endangered Species Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, Sanctuaries Act, CZMA. NOAA's got a lot of authorities that relate to this EO. So this is a very open territory for your views. And we'll be accepting, in this initial phase here, accepting public comments for 30 days. So the deadline is the 2nd of April, around the corner. And we've got a broad request for public input that you could find readily on the internet, and send comments to oceanresources.climate@noaa.gov. So there's a lot of ways that people could get to us, but sometimes the best avenues are just having the opportunity to quite literally, preferably in person, hear directly from you, but the best we can today with our remote access. So I really want to kind of throw it open. I don't know, Dave or who wants to necessarily moderate the conversation, but we really invite your thoughts and ideas, and it's open mic, and I'll turn it open. I have very limited ability to see people, so it wouldn't be easy for me to moderate request with the technology that I have right here. So I'll leave it to you. I'm kind of looking for hands and that type of thing, but whatever works, let me know. Yes.
Dave, do you want to moderate this?
Well, I'll let you do it. I mean, the main purpose of this was was for Paul to kind of introduce this, and as Paul mentioned, there's I think he sent an email out earlier today about there's a variety of different additional listening sessions, and just to kind of introduce it and see if people had comments or questions. And I mean, this obviously is a fairly in-depth and broad issue. So I'd say why don't you just open the floor and see if people have any comments, and then we can kind of go from there.
Okay.
Would be my.
Yeah, I don't have the ability to see everybody, so I can't see a hand raised or anything. But why don't we just take comments, and if you would please state your name and then make your comments, and then we'll move to the next person. Who's first?
Hey, this is Reed Hendon. Hey, Paul, how are you? So from your perspective, is this focused on sea level rise, loss of essential habitats, increasing temperatures that may lead to invasive species? From your perspective, what's the target of this from a fisheries angle?
Honestly, we do not have a target, and thank you for that question. And I know, and Dave hit it square on. This is a huge topic, and we've got to kind of order the universe a bit. And we're starting by asking in these kinds of settings. And Dave did mention we're having similar sorts of opportunities to connect with every single one of the councils. Of course, all three commissions, and we're having some public listening sessions, and we have this broad request for input, and we're going to use that to answer the question you just posed, because we want to know what are the things you're looking from your regional perspective dominantly, the view of climate as a stressor on the resources that you're managing, that you care about, that your communities depend on. That could lead us in a number of different directions, including any of the things that you mentioned and all of the things that you mentioned. So we don't have, Fisheries certainly doesn't have, NOAA doesn't have a lens on this other than trying to find out right at the front end, what are y'all really worried about? If you were sitting here as we are with Magnuson, with ESA, with MMPA, with some of our other authorities, CZMA, sanctuaries, these are things Congress has asked us to take care of, and we have this big condition that's kind of affecting it all. So what would you suggest we worry most about? That's like, and hate to do it, but I've got to put in the question back at you. What really jumps off the page to you?
Yeah, thank you for that. This is Reed again, and so I mean those are obviously general considerations I think that we're all concerned about. At the same time, when you look at the climate change impacts on what we're seeing regionally with atmospheric considerations, obviously what we're seeing with spillway openings, Bonnie Carey, I mean that's climate related. So that certainly ties into what we're seeing here in the north central Gulf of Mexico as a main consideration, particularly for our immobile resources like oysters, and then estuarine dependence that we're seeing with the shrimp species, particularly the ones that are juveniles during the springtime. So I think an hour, if you got everybody's concerns, we would need more than an hour, but
Probably
just right
so.
off the top of the bat, those are some I think we're looking at in Mississippi.
Thank you, Reed. Really appreciate that. And it is very helpful. And sometimes with questions this big, getting people's initial responses is really helpful, just ordering the universe. And when you get hit with a question like this, what's the first thing that comes to mind? And that's going to be very helpful input for us. And of course, there's these other channels. If you want to reflect more broadly or provide more extensive comments, there's other channels to do that through as well, including just through the written commentary. So thank you for raising those immediate observations about what you're seeing from your vantage point at the North Central Gulf.
Paul, this is Doug Boyd. I've got a couple of thoughts, if I could go next. The first thing that popped into my mind was not the Gulf, it was the Gulf Stream and the cooling of the Gulf Stream and that flow. And what does NOAA think is going to happen with the Gulf Stream, and how is that going to affect not only weather, but fisheries, migration patterns, spawning patterns, and anything else? I watch great white sharks, and I apologize, I can't remember the name of the group that is tagging great whites, but in watching those fish, they are moving now a lot into the Gulf of Mexico. There's one very large great white that has moved up onto the into the loop current around that area up in the panhandle of Florida, and then back around and up to Nova Scotia over the last couple of years. The other issue that I would like to know more about is invasive species and the proliferation of those species, especially lionfish in the Gulf of Mexico, with the changes in the environment and the changes in the climate. And that's my three quickly off the top of my head.
Thank you, Doug. That's really helpful.
Okay, anyone else? Scott, if you're there, you've been in this a long time and in law enforcement and in fisheries. Do you have anything?
Not really. I think that, everybody's put forth some interesting points, and I think the challenge is do we have the answer? And I think the answer is no, and we're working towards those. It's a very dynamic situation, so I don't have anything additional for it.
Okay. Anyone
Hey,
else?
Doug, this is Reed. I'll just weigh in on one more. When you look at this from the perspective of the East Coast of increasing temperatures, what we've been seeing in Mississippi with loss of Louisiana marsh, and thus we're getting increased salinities. On the East Coast, there's this expectation that things will shift north, migration as thermal tolerances change. We don't have that opportunity in the Gulf because, just like we're seeing it, you can't go any farther than the coastline. So I think when you look at potential longer term considerations, those would certainly be some that we would deal with, particularly with extreme dependence.
I just lost Reed. I don't know if everybody else did or not.
Yes, I think we did.
Yeah.
No, I'm
we
still
can't hear
here.
you.
Oh, sorry, Reed. I was getting a little
you-
bit of distortion, and then you stopped a little bit right when you were talking about estuarine dependence.
Okay. It was really just the concept of that as water temperatures warm, those that typically have occurred further south will migrate north. There'll be this latitudinal migration as to, based on the preferred water temperatures. That's not an option in the Gulf because we have that shoreline barrier to the north. And so there's, considerations for those migrant species that come in that you may have seasonal effects on abundance that obviously are something that we would be concerned.
Very good. Got it. Thank you, Reed.
Dave, just promote an idea here for a second. Should the commission have a subcommittee that could answer some of these questions for Paul, and we could put it together over time between now and the deadline for comment and do it in written form?
Yeah, we could certainly do that. If you like, or I mean that certainly is an option, and I guess we could ask for volunteers to
Sure.
work on something to come up with some more concrete answers. So.
Okay, well, let's you and I talk about that offline after the meeting, and we might come up with a volunteer subcommittee to pull together these kinds of comments so that we can have everyone around the Gulf participate.
Yep. And I will point out that Bev Sauls put a comment in the chat that ocean acidification from increased CO2 uptake is also a concern for mollusk and oysters such as oysters and scallops. That's a big issue in the Gulf of Mexico as well, Paul.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, I didn't have the chat open, so thanks for pointing that out. I was looking at my people list. So thanks. That's very helpful. Yeah, the shellfish considerations all around the country from OA. Again, that's one of those things that people are dealing with particularly at the hatchery level, dealing with that right now. So major concerns. Appreciate you pointing that out. And Doug, to your suggestion, if you all want to pull stuff together and ensure you're tapping the audience that you want to tap, that'd be great from our vantage point. We're capturing this conversation, but we welcome input as you all see fit to pull it together and connect with others who either may not be available today or we just weren't able to get views for any reason. I know it's a big topic, and you know, I've been kind of ruminating on Scott's comment. Do we have the answers? And I think that's part of the whole issue is there's more questions than answers. So we're trying to distill the really critical questions that you all have, and that would be, again, as I said earlier, that would really help us sort of order the universe and know where to try to focus subsequent follow-up efforts. We've got this. We were asked, you know, in a short amount of time to start gathering input, but this is a big question. These are long-term issues. We're going to be working on this for a while, so this is the front end of a long process. It's not like, you know, we'll be on to something else in 6 months. So we really want to make sure we hear from people and we have a sustained effort to get your views, to get your reaction when we start laying out eventually what it is that we think the most urgent issues are to address and a plan for doing that. It will undoubtedly involve close collaboration with all of the interstate fisheries commissions. And you know, any way you can get your comments and thoughts up front to us so we can start off pointed in the right direction, that'd be real helpful.
Okay, any other comments from the commissioners or participants? Paul, I hear none. Dave and I will talk about the possibility of pulling together ideas from across the commission and getting those to you, the critical questions. And, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that would be great. We welcome that, and we're accessible at any time. You know how to reach us, and we've got some of our key staff attending all of these points of engagement with all the commissions, all the councils, so that we can get a global view. So taking the time to do that would be really very much appreciated by us. We enormously value our relationship with, our work with, our partnerships with the interstate fishery commissions, and through them, the ability to connect with the constituencies that you work with day to day. So your voice is real important, and we really appreciate you taking the time to help us get oriented to this really big job and set us on the right course for the long haul in dealing with these issues. So all the topics that people brought up here today around climate impacts and the sort of resource implications for our management responsibilities. These are huge issues, and they're going to really command our attention for quite some time. So appreciate everything that you can do to help us see it from your perspective. So thank you, board.
Thank you, Paul. Any other comments from the commission? Dave? If not, we're going to move on to the next item. Item number 6 is Sea Grant Fisheries. Paul. Yes, Paul.
I was just saying thank you, and thank you, Dave. Really good to see you, and appreciate the thoughts people provided today, and we'll look forward to hearing from you. Just want to say thanks again.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 6, Sea Grant Fisheries Extension, and that's Laura.
Hi, everybody. Laura Picarello, Texas Sea Grant here. I'm going to leave my camera off because my internet's been a little glitchy today, so I'm trying to save the bandwidth. So apologies for that. The Sea Grant Extension, Fisheries Extension Group met last Friday on the 12th in the afternoon, and we started out our discussions with some regional projects that are going on. There's a lot happening right now at the regional level for most of the Sea Grant programs, and so we took the opportunity to provide some time to talk about those. As we've heard about in a couple of other places, so I won't go into too much detail on them, but there are several projects ongoing for the Deepwater Horizon Fish Restoration Plan, and Sea Grant is engaged in several of those. The first being the Better Bycatch project with the shrimp fishery, in terms of working with researching some new designs for bycatch reduction devices and incentivizing the industry voluntarily to utilize those devices as a means of reducing impacts to fish populations and restoring them. That project is just coming online now in terms of the Sea Grant partnerships. Louisiana Sea Grant and Texas Sea Grant are leading that, and we're in the process of developing a stakeholder working group and moving forward in partnership with NOAA on some communication strategies. So we'll be hearing a lot more about that project as it comes online and it's officially moving forward. There is also a project with the shrimp fishery with regard to the testing of smaller bar spacing on TEDs. Sea Grant has been engaged to participate in some level on that project as well. Because of our relationship with the shrimp industry and the project with Better Birds, we've also been asked to host a stakeholder working group to weigh in on some of the research that's occurring for TEDs. And so again, at Louisiana and Texas Sea Grant will be assisting NOAA in basically facilitating those stakeholder workshops. So there will be more coming out on that project. I think that plans to start this summer in terms of the stakeholder engagement component. And the fish descending device, for the short name of it, as you guys at Gulf States are engaged in pretty heavily as well. Florida Sea Grant has now brought on board Nick Haddad, who is the Sustainable Fisheries Communications Manager that's leading the Sea Grant efforts for this project. In terms of mitigating barotrauma. And so Nick and Charlie from Gulf States both gave the group just some updates on, the early stages of some of the elements of that project that's moving forward. There's also another project that's coming online from a fisheries perspective that we may be hearing about, though the Sea Grant programs are not officially engaged in it. But there is a project under the Fish Restoration Plan to identify bycatch hotspots and develop communication tools to help fisheries mitigate bycatch hotspot areas. And that project is starting to make some headway in the world as well. So we wanted to put it on everyone's radar. The Amberjack Research Project, which I mentioned in October, has been moving forward. This is a Gulf and South Atlantic project, similar to the Great Red Snapper account. So we're kind of affectionately referring to it as the Great Amberjack account. We held a series of listening sessions and interviews and stakeholder engagement in the fall that helped to identify priorities for this fishery and recommendations that went into an RFP for research. We did receive several letters of intent, and we are now in the full proposal stage for that RFP. There is a workshop on Friday, actually, for the full RFP workshop, and the final proposals are due in early April. We expect to do the review process in May and June, and our goal is to have research projects coming online for Greater Amberjack in July, and those will be 2-year projects. So those regional projects are all kind of underway and moving forward. Right now, the National Office for Sea Grant has also created a series of funding opportunities that the state Sea Grant programs can apply for, and there are a series of them that are specific to fisheries and seafood that are that many of the Sea Grant programs in the Gulf right now are writing proposals for. So there is a COVID impacts to seafood opportunity that there are some proposals that are going in that are state specific, as well as a regional program that's being put together in the Gulf of Mexico. There is a reef fish extension program. This is funded by Congress, similar to the projects for great red snapper count and amberjack, because we keep seeing these projects for red snapper that are priorities coming out of, or for the reef fish fishery as a whole, that are coming out of Congress. There was some interest in putting together a regional extension team that can be communicating science and information as these larger research projects are taking place, to better engage stakeholders on reef fish across the board. The priority is the Gulf of Mexico, but it does include involvement from South Atlantic and Caribbean. And there are a couple of groups that are kind of talking about the proposals and how this is going to shape up between partnerships across the Gulf Sea Grant programs and some South Atlantic engagements. So by our next meeting back in October, we should actually have a regional extension team decided upon, and we'll be able to update y'all more on what that's going to look like. But that'll be a 4-year extension team project for stakeholder engagement in the reef fish fishery. There's also some opportunities for general COVID response and an RFP for food from the sea careers to do some scoping on the needs of fishermen training programs and aquaculture training programs. And that's kind of in preparation for the Young Fisherman Development Act, which has passed and will likely see appropriations starting in 2022 to help fund fishermen training programs, and some ongoing aquaculture funding that can help support training programs. So lots happening at the regional scale, and lots of opportunities to move forward with fisheries and seafood related items. The states all gave their reports, most significantly from each state. Texas, there's a lot going on right now with relation to the Texas freeze. We saw some very significant environmental impacts. Parks and Wildlife released their results last week on the impacts of the freeze, with 3.8 million fish killed due to the cold temperatures. I believe that, apologies, I don't have the exact number, but over 90% of that was not recreationally important species, but certainly species within the food chain that relates to many of our recreationally important species as well. We also saw our largest sea turtle stranding event from cold stun ever. Over 10,000 sea turtles were rescued, cold stunned. Several thousand of them have been rehabbed and released. Some did not survive, and there are still some in rehab. That was a massive event. There were also some significant economic impacts with a lot of issues with processing plants and other locations, seafood locations, dealing with no power for several days, pipes bursting in a lot of seafood facilities that obviously are very water heavy. Aquaculture, the majority of our redfish farms saw total mortality of their redfish in their farms. Someone recently quoted me about $11 million loss is what the redfish fishery is looking at from the freeze. And we've had some significant problems with vessels, particularly our offshore vessels that go out for long periods of time have not been able to stock their boats, get enough supplies to be able to get their boats out, because grocery stores have been so short and have been limiting the supplies and limiting vital essential needs like milk and things like that. If you can only buy 2 containers and you're a shrimp fisherman and you're going out for 30 to 60 days, you're not going to get very far on 2 gallons of milk. So those have been some of the issues we saw. We also currently have now a drought declaration for 3 of the lower counties in Texas that could be seeing impacts from a lack of freshwater inflow going into some of those areas. Our Cameron County agent, Tony Reisinger, is looking at and following some projects down there associated with that. We also have a second fishery specialist to help me out now over here in Texas. Alexis Sabine came on board in November, and she is going to focus largely on recreational sector, since my focus is largely commercial sector. So we've got some extra hands here. For Florida, Florida updates, there's a new seafood specialist on Florida's side, and she is holding some virtual office hours monthly to help the seafood industry with seafood technology related things. Florida held the Artificial Reef Fish Summit online. They were able to transition that to an online forum for this past fall, and those presentations are all available on Florida's website. So if you're interested in some of the the artificial reef presentations, that is available on Florida Sea Grants page. They are also assisting with the Marine Resource Education Program. There's Sea Grant representation on their steering committee, and they're doing some work helping to kind of revamp that process since it is limited in terms of the number of people they can support in participating. They're working on trying to improve the application process and some information about the program to help increase awareness about it and increase their capacity to put people through that program. The Great Goliath grouper count is coming up again in June, and they've been seeing an expansion in the Great Goliath grouper count range, and so they are asking for any volunteer divers that are interested in participating more towards the Northern Gulf area. If anybody's interested in the Goliath grouper count, contact Florida. And the Florida Friendly Fishing Guide program has continued to improve and expand some of their modules for their program. And they are continuing to see increasing captains participate for their fishing guides for their area. So lots going on the Florida side. Mississippi, Alabama is wrapping up their tarp and tagging project, which they've been working on in the Northern Gulf. They did recently publish on that study. It is in an open access journal, so it can be accessed pretty easily. It was a great project. They had a lot of really involved anglers, particularly from Louisiana. It's one of their success stories. They have now published a book called Fishes. It's a textbook on fishermen invested in science, healthy ecosystems, and sustainability. This is a 10-chapter book that they put together, which they plan to use to offer courses and an extension class in Mississippi, Alabama area to better educate fishermen on science and healthy ecosystems in their area. And so they're looking forward to taking that to a classroom environment. They've also been highly involved in the Great Red Snapper count, and I know that Marcus presented earlier on that, so I don't need to share more. I think he already did. They've also, for COVID assistance, partnered with the Secretary of Ag and the Genuine Mississippi program. They've been helping to integrate seafood into the Genuine Mississippi program to help better brand Mississippi seafood. So that's come online in the last few months, and they're seeing seafood promotion now under that Genuine Mississippi branding. And they are also involved in one of the Gulf States projects in terms of for the descender, fish descender program, looking at depredation associated with fish descending devices. So that's coming out of their lab as well. Louisiana continues to work with the Department of Wildlife on CARES Act efforts, and they are doing quarterly assessments and providing information further and further through the COVID pandemic on how this is impacting fisheries and seafood related businesses. They have a large project coming online in partnership with LDWF associated with alternative oyster aquaculture. They're looking at addressing seed production issues and increasing hatchery support and expanding hatcheries to help support the alternative aquaculture industry. They also have some new resources coming online to support the Blue Crab soft shell project, the soft shell industry, on cost-effective methods and techniques to help support those businesses. Their director, Dr. Twilley, is actually in the process of resigning. So LSU is in a search right now for a new director for the Louisiana Sea Grant program. That is an internal search with LSU, and it is in process right now. We're not quite sure the timeline. Dr. Twilley has said that he can stay on as long as June, but perhaps may leave as early as April. So we're seeing some transition with Louisiana Sea Grant there. Hurricane impacts for Louisiana have been really tough in this past year. Since our last meeting, we did have yet another hurricane late in October that occurred just after the October Gulf States meeting. That hurricane hit Grand Isle and East Louisiana, which actually impacted quite a bit the alternative oyster culture industry. So they saw huge losses of gear, even for gear that was rated to withstand storms of the magnitude that occurred. So they are trying to address some of those issues right now and assist those farmers that lost gear and product at that point. They are also working on a small grant with respect to harbors of refuge. We've seen a lot of issues with the crazy hurricane season this past year of fishermen really struggling to find ports to go to, where to go. This was a problem in Texas as well. Louisiana is working on trying to identify some additional areas of refuge. They're no longer using the term safe harbor because, as we know, storms do different things and there's no one guaranteed place that is necessarily safe. But they're looking to increase some information to the industry and help identify additional areas that they may be able to utilize. There's also a black mangrove planting project that Sea Grant is working on. This includes a high school curriculum, educating them about restoration and mangrove benefits, and there are planting events associated with that. There is also a charter fishing component of that, where they're educating charter fishermen about the ecosystem and black mangroves and some of the restoration work as a way of helping pass that information on, that charter fishermen can pass along to their clients as well. We also had two guest reports. Ashford Rosenberg reported from the Reef Fish Shareholders Alliance on a project that's been ongoing in the Gulf of Mexico for the Gulf Young Fishermen's Program, but I understand that's been added to the agenda, so I won't elaborate on that for the moment. And the Audubon Gulf program also provided an update on some of their fisheries and marine related work. They continue to support fisheries in the Gulf of Mexico on sustainability initiatives, particularly market issues with respect to certifications. They have several projects running for certification and for fishery improvement projects for the crab fishery and the shrimp fishery. Those are progressing nicely, and it looks like the shrimp fishery in some areas may be moving towards certification and kind of moving the needle on being able to represent themselves that way in the market. They host a restaurant partnership program to help encourage local seafood in Gulf restaurants that is largely centered around New Orleans, and they have some grants from the city to do some work specifically promoting local seafood in New Orleans, but the program does broadly cover all of Louisiana, and actually I have partnered with them here in Texas to increase and bring some of that program to Texas. So we have about 6 restaurants so far in Texas that have signed on to that as well. And they also are now the sole marine mammal and sea turtle stranding entity in Louisiana. LDWF is no longer handling the sea turtle and marine mammal stranding activities in Louisiana. So they're trying to get the word out broadly that if anybody is encountering a sea turtle or a marine mammal in Louisiana, stranding situations should be reported either to Audubon or to NOAA. There is no longer a contact at LDWF that is handling stranding, so they are going to be pushing out information very broadly to the best of their ability. The more places they can get that communication out, the better, because I think there's been some miscommunications about who to call for stranding events. So that is the long of it. I won't say the short because that wasn't short, but we had a lot going on this year that we wanted to report about. So any questions?
Okay, thank you, Laurie. Any questions from the commission? Laura, I have one that's pertinent to Texas because I have not gotten to read that report. You said that there were about 3.8 million fish killed and 98% were not in the recreational, I guess the recreational resource, but there was more in the food chain. Were those menhaden and minnows and mullet? What, you have kind of a broad category?
Sure. I have to go through the details of the report myself, so don't quote me. A lot of what I have seen through some of the photographs and what I've seen along the coast, yes, has been those, pogies and kind of that category of fish. But I would certainly have to refer back to Parks and Wildlife's report. I just pulled the summary statistics for the moment. So sorry
Okay,
about
thank
that.
you.
Debbie.
I need to, no, that's okay. I was just curious because I have not read it. Any other comments from the commission? Yes.
Yeah, just to add a little flavor there, most of the dominant non-game species give you the top 5 or 6. Silver perch, hardhead catfish, pinfish, bay anchovy, striped mullet.
Okay.
There's a whole list, but those were the more dominant species of that group.
Great. Thanks,
Okay.
Robin.
Do we think a lot of the snook were killed in the lower Laguna?
Say that again, Doug, but I'm going to cover a little bit of this in my report later. So if you want to just defer.
Okay. Yeah, we'll defer it. Go ahead.
Okay.
Any other questions for Laura with the commission? Okay, Laura, Dave, we don't need to, we can just accept that report, or you need a motion to accept that report?
No, that was just information. The next 3 are just informational.
Okay. Well, let's move on then. The next one is NOAA Fisheries Southeast Regional Office comments. And Jack, you're up.
Okay, thanks, Doug. I just have a few updates for the Southeast Regional Office. We will be announcing the federal for-hire red snapper season very soon, and I expect it's going to be similar to the length of the season last year. We've had some talk about the great red snapper count, and that report is going to be independently reviewed in late March, and the Science Center is incorporating the results from the great red snapper count into an interim analysis, which is going to be reviewed by the Council's SSC in late March or early April. And then the SSC is going to provide us catch level recommendations to the Gulf Council at their meeting in April. With regard to our commercial IFQ program, the Catch Share Online system, which was built in 2010, reached its software end of life in 2020, and we've migrated it to a new modern software platform, and that was rolled out in December, and that transition is going well, and there are a few bugs here and there, but it's doing pretty well. The Gulf Council met in January, and they took final action on 2 framework amendments that would increase catch levels for great triggerfish and lane snapper. Those amendments have been submitted to us, and we're working on rulemaking to implement them. They also approved an amendment that would establish status determination criteria for red drum and unassessed species. At the April Gulf Council meeting, they're expected to take final action on a red snapper amendment that would adjust catch levels according to the ABC recommendations they get from their SSC, and another amendment to deal with state survey conversions. At that meeting, they're also expected to address COBIA Amendment 32 that would modify catch limits, size limits, and possession limits. They'll have a discussion on an update to effort data collection for the shrimp fishery now that the ELB units are not transmitting information any longer, and a discussion about Amendment 53 that deals with red grouper ACLs and allocations based on a recent stock assessment. Rich Malinowski talked with you, I believe, and about the Southeast Electronic For-Hire program that started up on January 5th. We've been spending a lot of time, the Seafire team has, working with fishermen doing outreach, helping fishermen set up accounts, answering questions. There have been webinars that have taken place with fishermen and law enforcement, and there have been weekly webinars for a couple of months now, I believe, every Tuesday, and there's one tonight at 6:30 Eastern time. The TED skimmer rule, which published more than a year ago, requires TEDs and skimmer trawls greater than 40 feet in length. That's scheduled to become effective on April 1st, but we're considering delaying implementation to allow additional outreach with industry, and that extension hasn't been published yet. And then the last item is just to let you know that we're revamping our online permitting system to expand capabilities for fishermen to apply and receive permits online. And that's the information I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Jack, thank you. Anyone on the commission have questions or comments? Hearing none, Dave, we're going to move on to the next agenda item.
Well,
We have, go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, I got a quick question for Jack. You mentioned the TED extension and that you guys are considering extending it or delaying the implementation. When do you think you all have a decision on that? Because I mean, April 1st is coming up pretty quick.
I would imagine very soon. I wasn't aware of that till Andy told me this morning, so I can get more information for you on that day.
Okay.
Okay, any other comments or questions for Jack? Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 8, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Region 4 Office. Glenn, you on?
I am. Thanks, Doug. I think I'm going to let Alan Brown say a few words. I have a couple comments after, but Alan, you on?
I am. Can you hear me? They changed buttons on these meetings, and I think I'm on.
Yes.
You're on.
Okay, good. Well, thank you.
We can hear.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and certainly always a pleasure to be here. I look forward to these meetings, and like many, look forward to meeting in person again one day soon. But thanks for giving me the chance to give a little insight into, into the Fish and Wildlife Services Fisheries Program and some of the directions that we may be taking into the future. The Fish and Wildlife Service conservation offices in the Southeast are interested in developing a strategic alignment with our coastal partners to identify actions and support that our fisheries staff can provide to assist the marine fisheries managers. This region of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has been connected with state managers through the Gulf States Marine Fisheries Commission for many years, and currently with Glenn Constant as being our point of contact, participate on planning subcommittees, and we provide insight and support on issues before the subcommittees and the commission. As a federal partner, we can provide, I think, a valuable perspective and connection to resources that may be difficult or maybe even out of reach of state managers. So I think specifically during this presentation, I'd like to get some initial feedback on thoughts on how we might better provide support to individual states and to the commission. I am going to preface that with some of this thinking and maybe some of the strategic planning that we're going through with our Fish and Wildlife Conservation offices is kind of brought about by some of the significant funding reductions that we've seen in the last couple of years, specific to the funding streams that we use to support the activities with our Fish and Wildlife Conservation offices. Their typical involvement in habitat restoration, population assessments, and things like that. Maybe some of the historical activities they've been providing. And it's not our intent to decrease any of these efforts, but just trying to think of how we can build additional capacity to meet some of the additional needs of our partners along the Gulf. So we've had some initial discussions on what this may look like. And again, just looking for some very preliminary initial thoughts if anybody has any out there. And we've come up with probably 3 areas where I see some opportunities to continue our cooperative efforts and even increase our coordinated conservation efforts. And certainly there's going to be probably more than 3. These aren't all encompassing. This is just some initial discussions that we've had. And in these areas where I think we have some opportunities for growth. It's been mentioned, aquatic invasive species, a huge issue, not just across the Gulf, but across the Southeast. And this is actually one area where we have seen some budget increases. And so then how do we use those budget increases to leverage capacity to meet some of the needs that we have, both as a service and as our partnership with the commission and with the states along the Gulf. Monitoring and recovery activities of T&E species, certainly a priority for the Fish and Wildlife Service, and I think there's opportunities to develop some cooperative efforts in that area as well. And then, certainly anadromous sportfish species restoration, striped bass. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. It's an important recreationally, it's important commercially. It's an economic driver in the Southeast and in the Gulf, and so are there opportunities within that realm that we can again increase our cooperative efforts. So again, this is just some initial brainstorming that we're trying to go through to meet some needs that we have in the area of conservation, and also meet the needs of our partners. So I know Glenn has a few words, and then certainly Dave, if you want to chime in, so would welcome your comments from the commission point of view as well.
Yeah, no, I think you captured pretty well kind of the idea and intent behind trying to use our capacity to the best of the best way possible to help the managers in the states on the Gulf. We've tried to kind of find what that might look like in the past through the TCC. We looked at the freshwater input into the estuaries, and I think we found common interest. I'm just not sure we found the right way for us to provide the best services. So I think maybe we'll come at this a little differently and try to offer some opportunities and some suggestions on the types of things we might be able to do. And so you mentioned invasive species. I know all the Gulf states have invasive species managers, A&S coordinators, and then maybe that looks a little differently depending on what state you're sitting in. The marine and freshwater management is not always conducted the same way, and maybe the A&S coordinators aren't as active in some states as others. So one of the things we thought about was maybe coordinating across states to find out what the most pressing needs are with respect to aquatic nuisance species, and to see if we can't maybe develop some proposals that might get a little bit more traction with the way the Fish and Wildlife Service support, or even some direct funding from the service for projects that we feel are strongly supportive of multi-state interests and that kind of thing. So like Alan said, those are just a few ideas, and we'd like to hear more if you have any thoughts on how our officers might be of assistance. But before I let Dave comment, I would like to close the door on one other thing. I mentioned at the last business meeting this idea of getting letters of support for the saltmarsh top minnow species status assessment or listing effort that the service is undertaking now. So that kind of took a different turn in where it's headed. So we won't be asking for requests or for letters of support anymore. I spoke to a few of you about what's going on with the saltmarsh top minnow, but just in a nutshell, I think because it was part of litigation, the service felt that it was probably the best course of action to go through the complete scientific assessment and write up a full species status assessment. So you've probably been contacted if part of your role is to deal with those kinds of things. I know all the states have been and probably will be again shortly. But and thanks for all the contributions and assistance in trying to get that done. So yeah, Dave.
Thanks, Glenn and Alan, we're all on the same page. I look forward to strengthening our partnership. Fish and Wildlife and the commission has a long-standing history of working together. And I think the areas that you've identified, invasive species and endangered protected species, are two areas that I think we can build on. I'd like to hear from some of the states to see if there are any other areas, and I think James will be reaching out to them to try and get some ideas. But I look forward to continuing this partnership and strengthening this partnership where we can, and making sure that we move both the commission and the Fish and Wildlife and the state's goals and objectives forward. So we appreciate you guys re-engaging and becoming part of the commission activities again. So
Good. Thanks, David. And my apologies. I know a lot of you on here, but I didn't actually introduce myself, so I will do that just so you know who you're listening to. So my name is Alan Brown, and I'm the Assistant Regional Director for the Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program for the Southeast region, based out of Atlanta. So my apologies for not for jumping right into the topic. And I also want to say, as I always do, how much we appreciate Dave and the commission and the help that we have with our cooperative ventures, and in particular with James Ballard and his administering of our small grants invasive species program. It's a huge workload that he and his folks take off of us, and so that is certainly something that's appreciated. But Dave and the commission and our Gulf partners, we look forward to continuing to work together to address all the conservation needs that are out there.
Okay, Dave, anything else? And Glenn? Any questions or comments from the commission?
Yeah, just real quick. This is Reed. Given the conversation we had with Paul about the current administration's focus on climate change, and within that talking about concerns about invasive species, about changes in dynamics between the freshwater marine interaction, I think there's certainly room at the table for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to contribute to those discussions. There's interjurisdictional overlap between what we're talking about there. So certainly seems to be a good fit with that climate change focus on fisheries.
Good point, Reed. Anyone else? All right. Not hearing any other comments or questions. Let's move on to the next the next item, which is number 8, NOAA Fisheries budget update. And Dave, is that going to be you, or is Jack going to participate with you on that?
no, I'm just going to give a brief overview, and then I would suggest I realized looking at the agenda I didn't put any breaks in here, so I would suggest that after this particular item we take a 10-15 minute break just to kind of get up and stretch our legs. So the details can be found in tab E of the briefing book. Both the House and the Senate have passed bills, and the good news is the NOAA fisheries budget is healthy in terms of fisheries issues. It passed at about just under 970 million, which was 125 million over the president's budget. The fisheries data collection, survey, and assessment, which include our fins and CMAPs. Fin and CMAP was 174 million and 24 million to the fins. Aquaculture continues to be funded at a high level at over 15 million, and there's a new $2 million project for a multi-trophic programs in state waters specific to the Gulf of Mexico. Steve is working on an RFP and will be providing an update under his program report. The regional councils and fisheries commissions, that's where the IGF money comes from, was funded at about just over 45 million. And there was the president, as he's done for the last couple of years, proposed some reductions, and obviously those were not implemented, which is good. And IJF grants were level funded at 3.4 million, and again, the president proposed to reduce or to eliminate those, which didn't happen. And then enforcement received just under 80 million, which is a significant increase over the past years. And there was language in there to eliminate the JEAs, which did not happen. So overall, it was a positive budget, and hopefully it'll be interesting to see with a new administration to see how that if that trend continues. The Biden administration seems to be focused on climate change and the environment, so hopefully the funding will continue to go in a positive direction. So with that, I'll answer any questions.
Any questions for Dave on the budget report? Okay, hearing none. Dave, question for you. We've got two more items before we have the Gulf States program reports. Do you want to go ahead and do those two, or would you rather break right now?
I mean, we've been going a little over an hour and a half. I'd say we take a 10-minute break and get back at 2:45 Central Time. And then
okay, that sounds good.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and do that, everyone. 2:45. Well, the next item is I guess it's going to require a discussion and then a motion, or so we need to be sure we got a quorum. Or
yeah,
is it
we need to make sure everybody's back, or most
Okay.
people are back. Chris is here. Texas. Robin's here. Jason.
As chairman, can I just make a decision? We'll move on.
Yeah, let's go. I'm ready.
We'll do it. We'll do it according to agenda.
Oh, I thought you meant move on with the agenda item.
No, I mean, I'll make a decision on whether it's one or two meetings a year.
No. Joe's back.
Yeah, I've stepped back on for a few minutes. I'm gonna have to get back off, but are y'all trying to get a vote on that or what?
Well, we're gonna talk about the next two. We're gonna vote on it.
Okay, I just gotta, I'll stick on with Ken. I got a 3 o'clock with the governor, so if I have to get off, I have to.
So do we, Dave, we got enough people back? Do you know?
I believe so.
Okay, well, let's go ahead since the general's got to keep moving. Dave, you going to go ahead and go on that one?
Yeah. So at the last meeting, and actually prior to that, there's been some discussion and suggestion that we move to one meeting a year. As I mentioned, my major concern with that is it minimizes our face-to-face interaction, and I'm a little concerned about it. But in tab G, I did a analysis of 2 meetings versus 1 meeting, and not surprisingly, it's less expensive to do 1 meeting than it is 2. I mean, that's kind of not really breaking news. You would expect that. So, and if we do go to 1 meeting, I would suggest that we meet in October, and that we expand the travel reimbursements for our subcommittees and committees, as well as commissioners, to allow attendance of the general session and the Lyle Simpson Award ceremony. We would cover travel for the legislative appointees and private citizen. Right now, the states are picking that up. And then potentially on Wednesday, have a full dinner instead of just a reception. And I took all those issues into account when I came up with the estimate for a 1 meeting. And it was still less expensive to do 1 meeting a year. So my recommendation is that we move to 1 meeting a year, starting in this October, assuming that we'll have a face-to-face in October, even though we're actually having this meeting now. We'll start in October, and then we can reevaluate in a few years just to see if there's any negative impacts, and that's the beauty of this. If we look at it and say, yeah, this is not really working, we can always go back to doing 2 meetings a year. So that would be my recommendation, and I'd just open the floor to discussion and hear folks' thoughts about what they think.
So this is Scott, and to just make sure that the committees and things could still choose to meet throughout the year as necessary, right? Because I still think that we'll need to do that to be prepared for it. Does that
Correct?
sound correct?
Yes. Yeah. The various subcommittees and committees would still, they would probably meet in the springtime sometime, but it just wouldn't be part of the commission meeting.
Dave, this is Reed. Have y'all given thought to doing the spring meeting virtually and having in-person in fall as a transition?
Well, I mean, that's kind of what we're doing now. And I hadn't really thought of that, but I think that it's doable, and if it turns out next spring we determine that we actually need to, we might need to do a face-to-face or a virtual meeting, we can certainly do that. But I wasn't actually planning on doing that.
Dave, this is Doug. What is the background on the reason for calling this vote or having this discussion? Is it financial or operational, or is it commissioners' time that we're concerned about in travel? What's the background?
It's certainly not financial. I mean, we've been operating like this for since I've been with the commission, and we've got the funding to be able to do it. It was mainly we've got so many meetings, and some of the committees were struggling with coming up with discussion topics. So we just decided that let's look at the possibility of just doing one. And the Pacific Commission, they have one annual meeting a year, and that's it. And then they meet as needed with their various committees and subcommittees. So I mean, it's not unprecedented for a commission to do that. Planning Commission is a little different just because they have management authority, so they need to meet more like the councils do.
Dave, this is Joe. Could we just kick this can down the road to the October meeting, and then all we'll be in face to face and we'll have a little bit more time to think about it? Would that be a possibility?
Sure, yeah. We don't certainly
Because
need to
we're
make a
gonna set the
decision
meeting
now.
we're gonna set the next year's meeting in October anyway, right?
Correct.
And if we decide we don't need a spring meeting and just one meeting, or we need a virtual in the spring, that would be something we could possibly do. Would that be something we could look at?
Absolutely.
I think that's an excellent idea.
And this is Reed. I would, consider just moving to a virtual in spring for the commission. It's one afternoon for us, and if it's planned in advance, it's not very difficult to work around. Committees may be another matter, but at least reduces the travel, making this a 2 to 3 day event as opposed to an afternoon, and then we meet face to face in the fall.
Right.
Dave, this is Robin.
Okay, Dave. Yeah, go ahead, Robin.
Okay, excuse me, Doug. Sorry about that. Getting at the general's question, Dave, were you planning to go to the full extra invite list in October already, just because you hadn't had a spring meeting? I'm just trying to understand, if we do wait, is that going to be a similar meeting to what you described for the October meeting? And then the second part of that question is, I'm assuming even though you might have already been looking at hotels for the spring, you wouldn't be into a committed obligation at that point in time. But I'll pose that as a question.
Robin, I hadn't actually thought about that because we hadn't made the decision. But yeah, if we decide at this meeting, it would be the expanded. But because, as you pointed out, with COVID and the lack of travel, we could still take a test run in this October and expand the travel authorization and maybe do the expanded travel authorization and do the dinner on Wednesday. And then the other thing too is because it would be one meeting, we might, instead of doing a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we might have to start on Monday. So it might be we might add a day there, but it wouldn't be significant.
Hey guys, this is Joe. I gotta go out. I'm whatever the rest of you want to do, I'm all on board. Okay. And the same thing with the next one, but I got to run. I'm sorry.
All right. See you, General.
Thank you, Joe.
This is Scott. I want to follow up on Robin's comment. I think that's actually a good idea to, make that trial run, to make the bigger invite list. Financially, we're in a good spot to do that. See what kind of participation we get. I know it still may be a little bit weird. Hopefully we are basically post-COVID at that point. But I think that is that's a good thought to see how that works out. And I think, and we talked about it before, I think I would be supportive of a potential virtual meeting. It is a time saver for us just to do this afternoon. No travel associated with it, but I definitely support at least the one meeting a year. And I know, again, we'll have this discussion in October.
I like that idea, and we can certainly make that happen for October. And Robin, to answer your question, in October we would not have obligated or secured a hotel for March yet. I mean, we'd be talking with them, but it wouldn't be anything that we'd be signed. So we wouldn't be, if we decided that we were going to go to one meeting, we wouldn't have an issue with get out of some contract. And I believe that's the case. Nancy, tell me if I'm incorrect. So not hearing from her, I'm assuming that means I'm right.
That is correct, Dave.
Yeah.
Because we usually determine the exact location
Right.
when we're at the October meeting, when the commissioners decide which location in their state they want to go to.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we got a path forward, Mr. Chairman.
All right. So we'll defer this discussion to the October meeting, and we'll do Robin's suggestion, Scott's suggestion that we expand the meeting.
Yep.
Okay, that's good. Next on the agenda is item number 10, discussion of the Lyle Simpson Award. Is that, Dave, you want to lead that?
Yeah, I will. So normally at the March meeting is when we select the recipient for the coming or for the current year. However, due to COVID, we still haven't awarded our 2020 award to Harriet Perry. So if we select one at this meeting, then we would potentially be presenting two awards at the October meeting. And I'm concerned that you know it's an extremely prestigious award, and I don't really want to dilute the importance of this award by having two ceremonies in October. So my recommendation is that we just don't have a 2021 Lyle Simpson Award recipient, or we put COVID on in the block there or something. You know, just and then that we make the 2022 selection at the upcoming October meeting. So again, that's my recommendation, but I want to open the floor to some discussion about that on how to proceed.
All right, commissioners, any discussion?
This is Reed. I think that's fine. I did want to bring up a point is when I've looked at the Lyle Simpson Award members, award winners from the past, there's been one glaring omission, and I'm not saying that we do that now, but the fact that Tom McElwain's not on that list to me is something that I can't believe he's not on there when you look at his contributions to national fisheries and fisheries in the Gulf. You know, he was director of Gulf Coast Research Laboratory. He was a fisheries administrator at NIMS. He essentially, wrote the legislation that created MARFIN. He was involved in the striped bass program. He was a lead in the marine shrimp farming. So whether we consider that now or in the future, I just wanted to put that out there. Yeah, he was on a personal level one of my mentors, and the fact he's not on the list is, I think, that's a big omission.
Okay, thank you, Reed. Anyone else?
This is Scott. I just want to say that I agree that it is a prestigious award, and I would not want to muddy the water, so to speak, with having two people and kind of stealing somebody's thunder. It's been a crazy year. I definitely would support, just putting the hyphen for this year or whatever, some annotation and moving forward. And Reed, remember to bring that potential nomination up in October.
Okay, good comments. Dave, would you like that in the form of a motion?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to approach. Before we do that, I just want to comment, and I agree with Reed about Dr. McElwain. But when the first year that I was the director, I may actually been interim director, we struggled with coming up with a recipient for this award. And now there's, I've talked with several members, and there's 3 or 4 deserving recipients, and it's kind of interesting that it was kind of, before we couldn't find anyone. Now we've got a list of very deserving recipients. So, but anyways, that's neither here nor there. That was just an observation. So yes, a motion would be great, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Well, I would entertain a motion. Reed, do you want to, or Scott, you want to do that?
Sure, I'll make a motion that we defer the 2021 Lyle Simpson Award winner and name one for 2022.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Scott, second.
All right. Motion on the board. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Anyone opposed to the motion? Hearing none. Motion passes. Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Any other discussions in that group of agenda items? Hearing none, then we'll move on to number 11, the Gulf States Commission program reports. Steve, you up?
I am, Mr. Chairman. Joe, on that agenda, if you could just move it up. I think your briefing book tab I, it looks like probably has the IJ report. I'm going to just hit a few of the highlights out of it. You heard earlier about red drum and mangrove snapper task forces. We're a little delayed thanks to COVID, obviously. We're picking up that process and moving it along. Since the last meeting in October, we did finish the Odolith manual finally. That's been made available on our website as well as the Atlantic States website. That was a huge undertaking. It includes 46 species in 17 species groups lumped together. And so far it's been fairly well received. It's come up several times as being cited in various pubs, and that's kind of a good indication people are using it. We are continuing to collect a few of the triple tail genetic samples. Most of them are international now. We're in the process of getting ready to have the final analysis done on those, and then hopefully Dr. Sayant will come up with some results. Our acoustic tagging is ongoing. We tagged 50 triple tail in 2019. Those tags are actually due to expire in May, but we have been getting reports coming in slowly. COVID has delayed a lot of the array owners getting out last year to download data and make returns on some of those tags. We're getting ready to put 26 receivers out in the eastern end of Mississippi Sound in a north-south array that'll effectively create a gate between Alabama and Mississippi. That'll close off the sound for the most part between what the DMR and GCRL have put out already. Let's see, there's proposed to put out an additional 12 receivers between Cat Island and Ship Island later this summer. We're still working out details if that's something that we can actually do. There's a number of acoustic projects being done through the small grants, and that information I'll run through very briefly. Related to flounder, we had proposed last year to do a large symposium looking at flounder issues. A lot of states in the Gulf and the South Atlantic are seeing declines in populations and some other issues, and not completely sure what's going on. We postponed that, but I'm continuing to work with two professors at LSU, Dr. Midway and Dr. Dance, and depending on what happens with vaccinations, we should be looking at doing a large symposium. I'm hoping later this summer, maybe into early fall. Again, it's hard to commit to anything at this point, but we are still planning to do something related to that. And then finally, the small grants. We started this last year. The IJ program was plussed up considerably over the last couple of years. Our funding went up from our previous base. As a result, we had some extra money in that, which allowed us to do the small grants to target research and data needs in the states, specifically addressing IJ species. Last year's 2021 projects included work on blue crabs, flounder, and oysters, expanding receiver arrays, doing some tagging. Texas was doing some environmental DNA work. Those projects go through December of this year, and as of the beginning of this past week, we actually got our funding level announced for next year. So the total available in 2022 for small grants to the 5 states is $974,800. When it's split equally between the 5 states, we're looking at $194,500 for each of the 5 states next year. The TCC will be providing proposals over the summer, as well as statements of work that will take up that amount and identify their priorities. And we will bring those to the commission in October, not necessarily for approval, but definitely to keep everybody up to date as to what's going on. And those projects should begin in January of next year and run for all of 2022. And then I did want to remind our commissioners that we had 4 subcommittee meetings over the last 2 weeks getting ready for this. There was also a CMAP meeting. Most of those subcommittee meetings are available to watch now over our YouTube channel. If you just type in Gulf States Marine Fisheries Commission into the search bar, all of our past meetings that were streamed will come up. So those are available if they were not meetings that you were able to attend, but you're interested in seeing, they're available there. And that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Steve, thank you. Any questions for Steve? Okay, moving on to 12B, aquaculture program.
Yes, sir. Again, I direct your attention to tab J this time. The aquaculture program has been going on for several years now. NOAA Office of Aquaculture provides us funds each year to do pilots and various projects in the Gulf with the intention of promoting and advancing aquaculture. We've done a 2019-2020 consortia for oyster research. That's an ongoing project. It's in its 2nd year. We still have several projects from 2019, our regional projects that are ongoing because of the COVID situation. There were a lot of delays, and those are continuing. We have there's 7 2020 projects that began obviously just prior to all the shutdowns. As a result, we've awarded multiple extensions on those. They cover a variety of topics from novel aquaculture items to the use of oil and gas platforms as potential work platforms. For 2021, all 3 commissions have received the next round for the pilot program. Unfortunately, the Gulf was so far behind due to COVID that we elected to hold those funds this year, and we're going to make a larger award available next year. We're looking at close to $1 million being available for competitive projects for pilots in 2022. And as Dave noted from the budget discussion, the Gulf Commission specifically has been addressed or been provided funding for a new initiative through Office of Aquaculture to promote IMTAs, integrated multi-trophic aquaculture systems, specifically culturing native species of finfish, bivalve mollusks, and macroalgae in Gulf state waters. We don't have a lot of details yet, other than the first year of funding will be around $2 million, and it is potentially for multi-year project or projects. The language limits us to state waters only. We will not have an RFP out until later this year once we actually receive the final funding level. And that completes my report for aquaculture. If there's any questions.
Thank you, Steve. Any questions for Steve? Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to 12C, CMAP.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The fall shrimp groundfish survey took place from October 1st through December 11th last year. CMAP sampled 251 stations during the survey. We had hoped to sample about 300 stations, but as you're well aware, it was kind of stormy last fall, and that really impacted our sampling effort. CMAP has been working to improve the identification of invertebrates captured during sampling activities. We've held several invertebrate identification workshops online over the past few months to help field staff in the identification of various invertebrates, including commercial shrimp, non-commercial shrimp, and lobsters and lobster-like shrimp. These workshops are part of a larger effort to hold a face-to-face meeting at some point the next year to provide a more hands-on approach to helping the ID of invertebrates here in the Gulf of Mexico. And I'd like to especially thank Janisa Fletcher at FWRI for heading this up and working with us on this. And there's also some staff there at the Gulf Coast Research Lab. They're doing a good job with some of the field guides that we're going to be using to identify these invertebrates. We received our fiscal year 2021 budget figure in February, and it was $1,953,625. It's approximately $28,000 less than last year. The CMAP subcommittee met in February to discuss the budget, proposed survey activities for 2021. We also discussed ways to spend remaining 2020 funds. These carryover funds will allow CMAP to sample at historic levels here in 2021, but sampling in 2022 will have to be curtailed from historic levels if funding does not increase next year. We are optimistic that we'll be able to resume our usual surveys in 2021. National Marine Fisheries Service is about to start, I think here in a couple of weeks, going out for their reef fish survey. Florida is going to be going out very soon in that survey also. And that's going to be followed by the spring plankton survey, the bottom long line survey, the vertical line survey, and then the summer and shrimp groundfish surveys along with the fall plankton survey. We are again looking at doing a full suite of surveys and full sampling this year. And finally, the Commission continues to manage CMAP data and distribute data to interested parties. That concludes my report.
All right, thank you. Any questions on CMAP? And I think you're up again on the CARES Act.
Yeah. Joe, you're going to give me control? There we go. Just wanted to give a brief update. A lot of things have changed since we last talked in October of last year, but very briefly, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act from last March dedicated $300 million in fishery assistance funding for affected fisheries participants who incurred a greater than 35% loss as compared to their previous 5-year average. There we go. Here we have the amounts that were allocated to the Gulf states. And just of note, Florida is working with the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission and not the Gulf Commission. But Louisiana began accepting applications on September 14th of last year. Their application process was originally scheduled to close on October 26th, but due to the several hurricanes that were affecting Louisiana last year, they extended that application window to November 23rd, 2020. They received almost 1,700 total applications, although not all the applicants were qualified for payment. So far, the commission has received 1,052 applications, and we've made payments in the amount of $2.7 million. Some of those actually went out the door this morning. Since Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries did not know how many applicants to expect across their application period, they decided to send out 2 rounds of payments. So depending on which sector the applicant applied for, each applicant received the same amount during the first round of funding. After paying on these applicants, and hopefully that'll take place here in the next few weeks during the first round, after that, Louisiana will be calculating how much funding is left for each sector and sending out a second payment to all of the qualifying applicants. Alabama began accepting applications September 14th of last year, and their application period was supposed to close on November 13th, but they extended that another couple of weeks to November 27th. They received 104 applications during the application period, with 74 of those applicants being approved for claims. The commission was able to pay all of those applicants except for we sent out money to all of them. A couple of them just came back from the bank today, but the vast majority of those should have received their payment here just over the last couple of weeks. But we distributed out about $3.2 million to affected participants in Alabama. The Mississippi application process began on November 9th and closed on December 8th. Mississippi originally received 237 applicants in their application period, but they encountered a problem where it was kind of a catch-22 type of situation where Mississippi residents who held fishing license in Louisiana did not qualify in Louisiana because they were not Louisiana residents, but they were denied in Mississippi because they did not hold a Mississippi fishing license. So these were people who lived in Mississippi but did the majority or did their fishing in Louisiana under a Louisiana license. So Mississippi worked with the commission and NOAA Fisheries personnel to help assist this small group in their spend plan. They modified their spend plan in December and reopened that application process in late December, and it closed on January 5th. And this allowed about 19 additional applicants to apply for funding. We received their applicant list in January, and 223 people were paid a total of about $1.4 million. The Texas spend plan was approved in January, on January 26th. They began accepting applications on February 1st, and that application period is scheduled to close tomorrow, March 18th. As of Monday, Texas Parks and Wildlife had received 245 applications. They'll be reviewing those applications for eligibility over the next several weeks. Overall, the commission has received 1,348 applications and has paid out over $7.4 million. The total that came to the commission, it was $28.8 million. These remaining funds must be spent by September 30th So we will be working with the various state partners in Louisiana and Texas to get those funds out. Mississippi and Alabama have finished up with their first round of funds. There will be a second round of funds, but there's still discussion as far as how NOAA Fisheries is going to release those funds, how much it's going to be, and the qualifying criteria for those funds. But that concludes my report, and I'll be happy to accept any questions.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Any questions? Does it appear that the whole process is going smoothly, or were there any big glitches?
I wouldn't say big glitches, but there have been a lot of the devil is in the detail type of instances where you, like the Mississippi spend plan, you can read over something like that and you never think that there would be someone or 19 people who live in Mississippi but only fish in Louisiana. So there's been some holdups. There's been some holdups with the approval process at NOAA Fisheries, but they have worked with us. They've streamlined that. And it's generally averaging about, once we get an applicant list from the states, about 2 weeks before we get that back with approval, and that we're either writing a check or getting electronic funds transfer out to everyone.
Okay, thank you. Anyone have questions?
This is Scott. I just want to make a quick comment that Jeff has been amazingly responsive to the crazy questions from me and my staff, and then and like he discussed the devil in the details. He found some items, you know, throughout our process and brought it to our attention for correction. So Dave and the rest of the staff, thank you guys for the efforts in this. I know it hasn't been you know, part of your normal everyday world, but from Alabama's perspective, you guys have been super and very helpful, and we're about to send you guys an invoice for our part and be done with this.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, if we have no more questions, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is tab E, Sportfish Restoration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, James.
Get this pulled up for you. All right, can you all see that? Is it showing correctly? Nope. What is that doing?
We're only getting half of it, James.
Yeah, I don't know. It's only showing half my screen. I only have one screen. Let's try this.
There you go.
Okay. Okay, all set. All right. I'm going to cover Sportfish first. Why are we not advancing now? There it goes. So first, we're continuing our efforts to do the pilot study of the Gulf Artificial Reef Monitoring Assessment Program. As a reminder, this is a multi-gear standardized sampling protocol that was put together with input from the Artificial Reef Subcommittee. Try and, you know, hopefully down the road be a standardized monitoring protocol that we could use across the Gulf for getting baseline data on artificial reefs. But as I reported previously, when we actually got out and started testing the gear in 2019, we found extremely low dissolved oxygen levels, and on 30 minutes of film, didn't actually see any fish at some sites. That was actually down in the lower end of FH13 off Mississippi. And this is that site and the data that's on the website that Joe developed for this program, where bottom oxygen levels were below 1, which explained why we didn't see any fish there. So with this last year with COVID and no travel, we were able to try to expand on this to get a better idea of what that water quality is doing over time out there. We were able to get some YSI EXO multi-parameter data sondes that we're hoping to deploy year-round to get year-round water quality parameters out there, and at a couple sites off our coast to add this to that protocol. We currently have temperature, conductivity, salinity, dissolved oxygen, turbidity, and pH probes, along with a central wiper that will keep those probes clean from biofouling over the deployment time. Joe has been working on a back end of the website that will be able to display all this data to anybody that wants it. We're currently doing the lab tests with the data sawn to check battery life and sampling regimens on it as far as how often it wipes and how many samples it takes per hour, so that we can get the longest battery life possible. We're targeting to have a 3-month deployment and only have to go out there and service these quarterly. And our last run we did, we almost had the full 3 months already. So I think the regiment we're working on right now, which will be sampling every 30 minutes and wiping the probes every 30 minutes, is going to make the batteries last the full 3 months. But when this goes live, when we actually have active data, we'll be able to go into the website here and click on these new blue icons. It's going to bring up a table like this that'll show you those 6 parameters that the data sawns are sampling with an average over the 30 days. If you click on any one of these parameters, it's going to pull you up a graph of what that measurement was over those last 30 days. These are averaged down to daily averages. Instead of putting every data point on here, like I said, we'll probably be sampling every 30 minutes. Those graphs got really busy, so we just took it down to a daily average. And then you're able to go down and actually expand this graph out from 30 days, 60 days, or 90 days. So if you extend it out to 90 days, you get the bigger section of the data. Again, this is in my lab tests of it in my aquarium, so we're getting very narrow ranges here. But I was just testing to make sure everything was working and the batteries are working. You can also go down and add a second parameter from those 6 to compare on the same graph. So in this case, select the temperature to go against the dissolved oxygen. So we got that good inverse relationship that you'd expect to make sure everything's working right. So all the data will be available through the website once we get it all up and running and start collecting live data. But these graphs will just be a visual way that people can go in there and check stuff for the most recent data that we have actually downloaded from the data sawns. We're deploying these using EdgeTech ropeless fishing systems, which are basically an acoustically released modified lobster trap. They use these for the commercial lobster fishery in areas where they're not allowed to use buoys because of whale closed areas. They just use an acoustic release, and they actually have their own smartphone app that talks with the receivers to locate where they are and stuff. And the idea is we'll test these out at inshore reefs or inside the islands to make sure that our biofouling measurements or measures we've taken to eliminate biofouling are working for that 3 months, and our batteries are lasting for the full 3 months, and we're getting good data. And then we're going to move the systems into deeper water to see what we're getting for year-round water quality out there at those offshore sites. We completed the 3rd year of the Jimmy Sanders Memorial Lionfish Challenge. We were, again, with COVID last year, we had to go to a fully virtual tournament. Well, luckily Fishing Chaos, who supports the fishing app for us for this tournament, was able to give us a virtual weigh-in that worked very well. We actually were able to increase our 2019 numbers by almost 50%, although we didn't really get more participants. The same small group of people out there collecting these, all pretty much with one fish or diving group, but they were able to make more trips, so they got about 50% more. We're still only collected a little over 50 fish, but they took a lot more trips. So basically what that's saying is they're just not seeing very many out there, which is really good. The numbers are staying really low. So this effort would not be possible without our continuous sponsorship from Ingo Cooler, Neritic Diving, Zookeeper, Fishing Chaos, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So that's how we're getting all of our supplies for this, to be able to do incentives to keep these guys out there. And the only other thing I would add is I've had discussions with Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission about our next joint artificial reef subcommittee. And both groups have kind of decided to postpone that meeting until into the summer, when hopefully we can meet in person later this year. And Mr. Chairman, that concludes my report.
Getting off of mute. Any questions on sport fish restoration, James? If not, we'll move to the next agenda item, aquatic nuisance species. James, I believe that's you again.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, under aquatic nuisance species, as Alan pointed out earlier, we are continuing the administration of the Fish and Wildlife Service Region 4 AIS Small Grants Program. Over the last 6 years, we've been able to fund 39 projects totaling about $850,000. These are covering a whole suite of invasive species in our region, along with some issues around invasive species like bait regulations. This program has definitely resulted in increased collaboration and communication between the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Gulf and South Atlantic Regional Panel, and the academic community in this region on invasive species. And every year we get more proposals than we're able to fund. So it does show that there's still a big need out there for invasive species research. As just an overview, this is the last list of projects that were funded under the program in 2019, which I've presented these to you before. In 2020, again with COVID, a lot of our universities were shut down or at very limited capacity. So we decided to hold on to 2020 money and put that into the grant. And we'll combine that with this year's money as soon as we get that final number and put out an RFP for larger projects that cover a larger timeline, looking at possibly $50,000 each 2 years. So we look forward to continuing that effort with the Fish and Wildlife Service. It's been a great program so far. We're continuing our efforts with our invasive species traveling trunk. Since they were released, and we have 3 of them released in this July of 2012, they've been used for over 1,500 days. But in 2020, we had very few reservations of these. The majority of people that use these are schools and state agencies at public outreach events. Most of those activities were severely hindered or canceled altogether. The only state that was actually able to utilize them last year was Georgia. And they came up with a pretty ingenious way to do it. They actually took the trunk and set it all up in the back of their pickup trucks and drove to schools that were still in session in the fall and did outdoor demonstrations on invasive species to still get the message out. So that worked out pretty well. And we're hoping this ramps back up once we get back to regular school and stuff. Let's go over quickly the activities of the Aquatic Nuisance Species Task Force Prevention Subcommittee, which I'm chairing for them. Is made up of a large group of federal members and state members, as well as some non-government organization members. Our first objective that we were covering under there was to evaluate and refine the NISC-ANS Task Force's Pathways Risk Assessment document. In 2020, we were able to compile a list of all the current published literature on risk assessments and pathways of invasive species, but we ran into a lack of funding and staff time to do a complete literature review of all those that literature we compiled. But in 2021, we're actually working with the USGS. We have a meeting tomorrow with them where they may be able to utilize their student employees over the coming summer to do that literature review for us, and then we'll take the findings from that and work on between that literature review and lessons learned, work on updating that document to a more current version. Second objective we're working on, which this is one of the main ones in our region that we keep fighting with, is to work with applicable federal agencies and responsible industry sectors to make organisms and trade importation data electronically available and searchable. I'm sure you're all aware, but currently the organisms that come in through the pet trade are on declarations, and those are they're usually compiled into marine ornamentals or freshwater ornamentals. And the only data that gets down into the species level is either on an invoice that can be handed in hard copy, or as we've dug into it more, can even be used far down as like written on the side of the box. So we're working on trying to resolve that so that we can have more readily available data on exactly what's coming in and the propagule pressure of individual species at any given time. So the Fish and Wildlife Service drafted a decision memo to include high-risk species in those declarations. So we at least want to get those highest risk species that we've identified on the declaration listed as species, because those are automatically electronically available. The USGS did work on taking a list from one of the importers and digitizing that as a first step towards having a database that we could use as that the platform for a fully digitized importation data framework. And the Fish and Wildlife Service and the USGS are also working on several projects with doing global horizon scanning to look at other organisms that may come into the trade that aren't on our radar yet. So in 2021, the Fish and Wildlife Service is going to work on finalizing the internal agreement to allow those high-risk species to be entered into the LEMIS database and to be added to their LEMIS declarations. And then Fish and Wildlife, or between the Fish and Wildlife Service and USGS, we're trying to work out this problem with hybrids in the pet trade and how to get those into that digital format, because a lot of the pet trade does work with hybrids, and how do we get that like an IDIS code for those hybrids? So we're trying to resolve that problem. And then hopefully they'll complete the horizon scanning projects and the watch list that'll be developed from that, so we can add those into the high risk species category. Next objective we're working on is to assess ANS introductions and determine where prevention measures failed. In 2020, the USGS was able to do a query of their database. They house the NAS database of invasive species, and they looked at human-mediated introductions over the last 10 years, and they provided that list to our subcommittee. Not surprisingly, the vast majority of those were from the pet trade, right around 75%, new to the US and new to a state, which kind of leans back to the last objective there, that we really have to get a handle on that. So we did have some discussion with the industry on different outreach campaigns. There's several current outreach campaigns across the country, trying to find out which ones are the most effective, and we've actually pushed that over to the outreach subcommittee to do a full analysis of those different campaigns, and talk to them about programs like the take back programs. But that's a pretty hard one, where the bulk of the stuff being sold is coming out of big box stores or on the internet, where they don't have the capabilities to do a take back program. We're exploring the internet sales of pets. Again, that's another really black box to us. A lot of the pets are being sold over the internet through all kinds of vendors, and it seems like you can get almost anything. So looking into using web crawler tools to see what's out there on those. And again, we were going to do those individual case studies on those new introductions, but we ran into that problem with funds and staff time. But the USGS thinks that their student employees could also start digging into those case studies to see if we can get some really good ideas of where prevention failed on those, and see if we can beef up those where it did fail, or fill those gaps. So in this year, like I said, we'll be looking for USGS to hopefully do those case studies, and then we'll review those studies, evaluate additional prevention metrics. Currently, it's really hard to measure how well prevention's working, because if it's very successful, then nothing happened. But it's hard to get more money put into prevention when there's no metrics to measure it. So we're looking into how we could actually have a way to measure that. And then looking at other tools like artificial intelligence tools that are out there for, again, assessing the internet pet trade. Another objective we're looking at is dealing with the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act. In 2020, all the activities pretty much under this objective were carried out by the EPA and the US Coast Guard, which are both named in this act to enact it. So they've carried out their specific tasks that are outlined in the act in 2020. And in 2021, we're really looking to kind of bring the task force and state input into the process, and see if they can start having, expressing some of their issues they have or concerns they have with some of the things listed out in VITA. One of those would be having the task force review the Coast Guard's ballast water report to Congress, and just facilitating some of those state and regional discussions under VETA. And that'll be some of the activities that we can conduct by establishing that subcommittee across the national level. And then the last objective we're working on is to enter into national prevention practices agreements that promote effective risk management measures. And under this one in 2020, we were able to develop a notice of funding opportunity for seaplane risk analysis. We're able to identify all the different funding came from multiple sources to support this NOFO. The Western Regional Panel is drafting guidance document on marine mobile infrastructure, and then the Fish and Wildlife U.S. Forest Service is working to address the risk of aquatic invasive species spread by the forest fire community. And then also the Western Regional Panel and the Great Lakes Panel are discussing the used boat hauler pathway and the possible risk associated with that. So in 2021, we'll look to get that NOFO posted and hopefully select an awardee to get that seaplane risk analysis underway. We're going to discuss with the Western Regional Panel whether they want the task force to review and approve their best management practices for marine mobile infrastructure to raise it to a national standards, and then also make the task force and the Western Regional Panel aware of the risks of spread of AIS through forest fire activities, and continue to work to address those issues. A lot of that comes down to the contracts that they write up with the people that are actually out there fighting the fires on the ground. So they have to get that implemented into the actual work on the ground. And it wouldn't be a invasive species update if I didn't bring you more bad news. So this came to our attention a couple weeks ago by actually a salesperson at a Petco in Washington State who alerted the USGS because they thought they found zebra mussels in these little balls of moss that are sold for aquariums. That triggered a very rapid response on the federal and state side to get out and assess how far spread this was. They determined that there were live zebra mussels in these. At last count, it was around 34 states had these identified already in pet shops. They've got it, I think, narrowed down now to a supply coming out of Ukraine, distributed through 3 different distributors in the US, but it's being sold under multiple product names, both online and in brick and mortar shops. So they were able to get messaging out both through the distributors, through the point of sale, and to aquarium owners that may have got these on how to disinfect systems. It's not easy. Basically got to sterilize everything in there. But we at least were able to get on top of it really quick, and hopefully didn't get any new introduction of these anywhere, because as you're probably aware, we spend millions of dollars a year trying to stop the spread of zebra mussels, especially from getting out west where they would greatly hinder water distribution and hydropower systems out there. So, and other than that, I am hosting the next Gulf and South Atlantic Regional Panel meeting virtually on April 21st. And the task force is looking to hold another virtual meeting. They just had to move it again, so they're looking at sometime late in June, possibly, to hold that next one. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Okay, thank you, James. Questions? I've got one quick one, I hope. How would you police an individual aquarium in an individual house and make sure they really have disinfected if they have a problem with that for the zebra mussels?
Yeah, that's the real problem with this. Is all we can do is provide them with the information, but one of the concerns is the guidance on that is basically just to take the fish out and then bleach the entire system, and even after that, throw away all the media in the filter and all the rocks in the bottom and replace it with all new. So the question really becomes how many people are going to go to those lengths,
right,
or are they just going to take the moss balls out of there and continue on down their way? And hopefully not take the whole system out and dump it outside somewhere. So that's the messaging we're really got to get across, but it really leans back to, we got to get a handle on the front end of the pet trade coming in and know what's coming into this country. With the moss thing, it was, they're coming in, I believe, under APHIS because of the plants, but without realizing that there was an invasive mussel inside of their moss ball when it's coming in. So we really need to get all this kind of pulled together and get a better handle on what is coming into the country and the risk associated with it.
Okay, thank you. All right, no other questions? Then let's move on to the next agenda item. It's 12G, Fisheries Information Network.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it was mentioned earlier, but our Gulf-In Committee selected to not meet virtually prior to this meeting. We have a multitude of complex issues coming up, and the hope is that by this summer, we'll be able to meet in person, or at least some of us in person, maybe a virtual in-person hybrid type meeting. But our goal is to meet this summer, and we will bring the high points of those discussions back to the commission in October when we meet again, hopefully in person as well. So, Joe, can you take me to the next slide, please? So tab O in your briefing book gives you a look at some of our funding issues, but a word of caution for this year, for 2021, we're still operating with a tiny bit of uncertainty with regards to funding. So where we're at is we've received partial funding for this calendar year. We're confident we're going to be able to support all the ongoing work, which is all of our normal fishery dependent surveys, the federal MRIP survey on the recreational side, the ways we assist Louisiana and Texas with some of their recreational work. It even includes an increase to, it's not really an increase, but a restoration of funding to base levels of sampling in Florida for the dockside field survey, which we've never been at for at least the last 6 or 7 years. So it's good. We have received some funding increases thanks to the hard work of those that go up to Congress and talk about how important these data collection programs are for science and management in our region. We're also, for the first time, able to support the state surveys that have gone through MRIP certification and received that. Through some Modernizing Recreational Fisheries Management Act funding, we're able to support Alabama Snapper Check, Mississippi Tails and Scales, and an aspect of the Florida State Reef Fish Survey. This money is centered around ways to maintain and improve upon electronic reporting methodologies. And so those are already in place in Mississippi and Alabama, and we're going to be working with Florida to help them build some tools, electronic tools to collect data dockside as part of their state reef fish survey. The biggest unknown right now, and it's more ongoing, years unknown, is the sea fire survey. The commission is helping NOAA Fisheries through its partnership with the states to implement a dockside validation survey that will be coupled with the electronic logbook program that NOAA has implemented for the federal for-hire fleet. The hope was that survey would be already going by now, but it's not. Delays have forced us to postpone the start date of that, and we really don't know when the start date's going to be. And you couple that with some uncertainty of what ongoing funding is going to be available for years 2 and beyond for the validation survey, and we're kind of in a holding pattern for submitting our 2021 budget and cooperative agreement to NOAA. We're hoping to find out some clarity on that in the next few weeks, hopefully, and when we do, we will be submitting our 2021 budget and statement of work to NOAA. Next slide, please. So typically in our March meeting, I give you a year in review of the prior year. It's pretty straightforward for this report. COVID-19 impacted everything from a fishery dependent standpoint. When we came out of our houses that we visqueened ourselves into for a month or so, or a few weeks, Social distancing rules impacted our ability to sample. It impacted our ability to get close to anglers, to get close to fish that they harvested. But when we were able to get back out into the field, the states did an amazing job of developing some protocols to ensure safety for their samplers and allow them to sample in areas that were not prohibited by state from accessing. So all that's to say, we collected everything we could, and we've delivered everything that we could to the folks that are involved with science and management. I looked at, just from a recreational sampling standpoint, the number of angler interviews we were able to collect, and we were down from the prior 3 to 4 year time frame. We were down 6,000 to 7,000 angler interviews from what we would normally collect. But that's not surprising, knowing the world we were living in and the restrictions we had to deal with. But I think the states, everybody did an amazing job of keeping their people safe and still prioritizing as much as they could, continuing to collect these essential data. And we've delivered it, and I'm glad I'm not the person in charge of trying to figure out how to use it, because it was a different year than anything we've been exposed to. So next slide, please. I just have 2 more slides, and I just want to focus on 2 major areas of progress with regards to the Gulf Fin program and our collaborative work, state and federally. The first is, we have, as of March 1, we have transitioned to electronic tablets for collecting the MRIP APIS survey, or that's the dockside survey. That survey has been in place under different names since 1982, and it's always been collected with paper. Thanks to some work by our partners on the Atlantic coast, ACCSP and the NOAA MRIP staff, they started working on this idea of transitioning to electronic tools for collecting these data probably about 3 years ago, and they've been doing it on the Atlantic coast for about the last 2 years. They were very generous to share all of that development work with us, which allowed us to get started on this with a much lower startup cost than if we'd have started from scratch. And so we've been working on this for months. The commission staff has traveled to all 3 of our MRIP states, Florida, Alabama, and Mississippi, to train staff on how to use the tools, the application and the tablets. We're 17 days in right now, and I can tell you that there have been a few hiccups, but we've lost no assignments, we've lost no data. Data's flowing. We have roughly 75 tablets in the field right now. And the response I've gotten back from everybody has just been a unanimous level of excitement of this transition away from paper data collection methods to electronic. It allows for a lot more quality control at the point of collection, and it allows us, from a data management standpoint, a lot more quality control the instant the data arrive. We don't have to wait for this 5 to 7 day lag for paper forms to get to us and then for us to transfer it into an electronic format. So the other beauty of this, as I mentioned, the CFIRE program and the validation survey that's going to come online at some point later this year, this same data collection and management structure is going to be used for that. So the same contractor that built the MRIP app is building an app for the CFIRE validation survey. And so our vision is to implement that CFIRE app in all 5 of the states that are doing this validation survey at some point this year. And we'll add some more tablets into the field for our 2 non-MRIP states, Louisiana and Texas. And I think it'll be a very positive step forward to be moving away from paper reporting methods and moving towards electronic. This is the way everything is going. Paper is still there. It's an emergency backup in the case of a technological failure, but they don't send us paper. They just retain the paper and either use a working tablet or find out what was not working at the time. They're still entering the data through a tablet and getting it to us electronically. It's working really nicely, and we're very excited about it. Next slide, please. The last area is also in the realm of electronic technologies. So we've been working for several years now with Bluefin Data, who has been the contractor who's created the electronic reporting tool for electronic trip ticket data for 20+ years. They've been working on developing a new system that it's a transition away from a PC-based system, which is a program installed on a specific computer at a dealer's site, to this vessel system. It's a web-based interface. It allows for greater control and oversight by the state partners. It allows the contractor to monitor program performance and catch errors very easily that might be happening in the programming itself. It allows for increased quality control at the point of data entry. And most importantly, it allows dealers to access a data reporting system through multiple different types of hardware. They can use desktops, laptops, tablets, any way, to access it through the web, they can access it. And the nice thing too is what we found through this development process, which has slowed it down a little bit, was each state requires a certain level of customization to meet their state requirements. And then our federal partners also have a level of customization that's required to meet federal reporting requirements. And that's all capable through this new system in an easier fashion than it was through the program that needed to be installed locally on a given piece of hardware. So it's fully deployed for both the state and federal reporting requirements in Florida. And Florida is working to transition dealers that are interested in this system to it. One of the benefits, Florida has also developed a system to where they can provide commercial dealers swipe cards or cards with scannable barcodes on it. And they've developed a way to where you can use a camera system through a mobile device, scan their card's code, and electronically initiate the trip ticket transaction, which there again, it pre-populates a bunch of fields and it just saves on key entry mistakes. And that actually for them down the road could pave the way from moving away from paper reporting options if they determined that was a beneficial way to go and was providing those to all other commercial dealers. It's partially deployed for Texas. The state requirements are in place. I've been told they're very close in deploying the federal requirements as well. Mississippi has also been working with Bluefin. I believe their requirements have been approved. I think they and Bluefin are on the same page there, but they're also asking Bluefin to work on a data export process for them that's going to make it easier for Mississippi DMR staff to get data from Bluefin and get it into their own databases. For our other two states that are still evaluating, like, do they want to move in this direction with electronic trip tickets? I believe both are evaluating that, but haven't made a strong move in that direction yet. The PC-based system is still operational. Changes in software advancements have not phased that system out. So the PC-based system still works, and paper reporting is still being used in several locations. So, but in both the recreational and commercial side of fishery-dependent data collections, we've made some advancements in electronic technologies, and I think that's going to make life easier on both data managers and the scientists that need to get access to that information for stock assessments and management decisions. So next slide, Joe. That's it for me. And if anybody has any questions, Gulfin related, I'll do my best to answer them.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the commission? All right, I hear none. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is fisheries restoration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to give you guys an update on the newest member of the commission programs, that's the Fisheries Restoration Program. If you remember from the last update we had at the last meeting, we were working on getting some RFPs out for some of the work, for some of the key components of that project. We've since gotten those RFPs out, gotten some great proposals in, and we're currently working to finalize some agreements to get some of that work started as soon as possible. We're looking at hopefully getting some things going by next month if everything goes smoothly. One of those big picture items is a research and monitoring. So we got some really good proposals in to do some mortality validation research across the Gulf. We selected 2 projects from the group of proposals that we got in that we're going to hopefully get started on next month if we can get the agreements in place. The first project will be with Dr. Steven Zadelmeyer. He's with the Auburn University School of Fisheries over at Dolphin Island, I believe. And his proposal is kind of looking to determine predation mortality, looking at barotrauma survival and immigration patterns for red snapper caught and released using 3 different release methods, which would be surface venting, drop weight, so descender devices, and then also using a cage release method. This study is going to take place off the coast of Alabama. It may have some overlap into Mississippi and possibly even the Florida Panhandle waters. Looking at various depths and how those kind of affect the different survival and depredation rates. The second proposal that we're looking to fund is with Dr. Marcus Dryman, who'd given a presentation earlier today as part of the Great Red Snapper Count team. He does a lot of really good stuff. He's out of the Mississippi State University Coastal Research and Extension Center. And the focus of the study that he's going to be looking at is kind of an extension of some previous work that he had done, looking at whether descender devices for recreational caught reef fish may increase opportunities for depredation in the Gulf. The project is really good because it looks at data from a Gulf-wide standpoint. They're going to be collecting data from Texas all the way to Florida. And it's got a really good component that really engages the recreational reef fish anglers to collect and record some of the data for the project. So we're really excited about both of those 2 projects and hope to get them started very soon. In addition to that, we've also got a human dimension survey. This is a little bit different type of research. So it's kind of looking at the perceptions and perspectives that the anglers have on descender devices across the Gulf. So what we're looking to do here is administer a series of Gulf-wide surveys to reef fish anglers to gather data to measure their knowledge, behaviors, and attitude, and just their overall perceptions regarding handling and release practices of reef fish in the Gulf of Mexico. So with that survey, there's going to be 2. There will be a pre-survey that we'll use to collect baseline data from the reef fish anglers, and then we'll have a follow-up survey as well several years later that will kind of help us measure the change in those perceptions over time as our project hopefully affects some of the perceptions that they have and provides some knowledge on how to use descender devices and implement best handling practices across the Gulf for different fishing scenarios in the recreational sector. So we're really excited. We're hoping to start that survey, the pre-survey, at least in August of September of this year. So we've still got a lot of planning to do to get some questions and logistics on how we're going to implement that survey in place. But we're hoping to start in September this year, and then the follow-up survey we're shooting for probably 2024 or 2025. So it's a little bit further down the road. Another big part of the project that we're currently working on right now, and this part is really still in the development and planning stages, is the distribution of devices and tools to the anglers. So we've been working pretty closely with our project team and with the Florida Sea Grant and NOAA to figure out the best strategy to distribute the descender devices and tools that we're hoping to be able to promote best handling and release practices across the Gulf. The approach that we're looking at right now is a multi-phase rollout. We're hoping to begin distributing to the for-hire community probably this fall. We're going to focus on them first so that we can kind of figure out the issues that we may have as we try to roll out this, really massive scale distribution of devices and tools to the anglers before we go into a full-scale rollout. From there, in the second phase, right now we're talking about maybe focusing on just the Alabama, Florida Panhandle area in the second phase, with getting some spillover from the anglers that are interested in the other areas. But then in the third phase, we would kind of expand it to the Gulf wide. And so hoping that kind of helps us slowly phase this distribution out and get it across the Gulf into the hands of the reef fish anglers. So that's kind of where we're at. The next steps with the project, we'll be reaching out to some of the states. We've been in contact with several of them already to talk about some of the best ways to do these things, especially concerning the device distribution. But we're also kind of looking at best ways and most effective ways to distribute our outreach and education materials as well. So we'll be working with the states pretty closely, and if we haven't spoken with you yet, you'll probably be hearing from us relatively soon. And I guess that's about it for the project. We're still very much in the development phases still, but hoping to have some things happen here pretty quickly this year, and probably at the next commission meeting we'll have some little bit more interesting stuff to update you guys with. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions from the commissioners? Are these the devices that were paid for by NOAA to be given to the fishermen?
So yes, sir. So the idea is that we'll distribute this devices at little to no cost. With the Descend Act is going to have some effect on that possibly. We're not really sure how that's going to come into play, but the initial idea was that they would be at no cost to the fishermen.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you for your report. We're going to move on now to item 13, State Directors Reports. First is Florida. Dan,
Sure.
are you out here?
Yes, sir. I'll try to keep it pretty quick and just go over what we're doing with the CARES Act, since we're not included in the Gulf side. So back in December the 23rd, we mailed out approximately 9,790 applications, and we received back probably about 25%, which is around 2,400 of them. The deadline was January 31st, but once we started going through the applications, we found out a majority of them, pretty much all of them, weren't complete. So we had to extend the deadline, reach back out to the fishermen and wholesale dealers, and tell them to get their information correct by March 1. So after we did that, it looks like we're going to start sending out payments next week. Looks like we got roughly 1,539 eligible applicants or qualified applicants, paying around 22 cents on the dollar. So hopefully we'll be able to close out round one of the 23 million that we received, and then we'll get ready for 2.0 and start sending applications out for the next go around on the next 300 million. Regulatory wise, we've done some things in the Keys and Western Dry Rocks. We closed down the Western Dry Rocks area to fishing. We have some red tide issues going on in Southwest Florida. So we've made a snook and red drum catch and release only. It looks like this May, we're going to try to go back to a in-person commission meeting. It's going to be in Miami so far. We're trying to find venues that we can space folks apart. The virtual meetings that we've been having a lot of technical difficulties, so it doesn't seem to be fair to the stakeholders. So we're going to try to go back face to face. That's pretty much all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Any questions? Okay, moving on. Alabama, Scott.
Okay, guys, I'll be quick as well. We added amberjack and gray triggerfish to our snapper check program as mandatory reporting, just trying to correlate some data that we're already gathering through some other programs. There was already some mention about the CARES Act funding, so I'll kind of skip past that. We are almost complete with the expansion of 110 square miles of artificial reef zone. Some of that's going to be relatively near shore, and then another larger section just south of Dolphin Island. And we are part of the group that's using the APIS tablets, and we've had very positive feedback. Even though we had reduced surveys over the last year due to COVID, the staff just started working with the new tablets, and a few minor glitches, but all in all, probably one of the better electronic rollouts I've seen. So kudos to all the folks that worked on that. Still trying to work through some storm damage, both at our offices, but also at some of our public access boat ramps. We're rebuilding the Fort Morgan fishing pier and that ramp. They're both had some challenges, and a couple of other boat ramps, but we are open for business for the most part. Our hatchery, we released about 30,000 spotted sea trout and 30,000+ flounder this last year. And we're working with Auburn to do some cryogenic work and do some genetic work with Auburn University. So that was a program just got kicked off in the last few months. What else? On the enforcement side, things are going pretty well. We purchased a couple of standalone camera systems that we can move. We call them our turtle cams to use along the beach to monitor some potential nesting and watch what goes on there. It has night vision. It communicates to our current coastal remote monitoring system, so it can be monitored 24/7 if we want to. Also, our enforcement staff helped with, we had the interesting anomaly this year of a stranded whale in Mobile Bay. And so we worked with the Marine Mammal Stranding Network along with NOAA and a multitude of other agencies. That was a very, very challenging situation. It just doesn't happen here. Had not happened in the 30 years of record keeping. I think the cooperation between all the folks was actually went pretty well. And unfortunately, the whale had to be euthanized. And then they provided a necropsy afterwards. So that was just a strange event for our enforcement folks to participate in. And I think that basically concludes my report.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Any questions for Scott? Okay, thank you. Next up is Mississippi General. Are you there?
Mr. Chairman, this is Rick Burris. I'm filling in for General Spraggins.
All right.
He wanted me to go over a couple things. Jeff covered in detail the CARES Act payout, so I won't talk about that. He wanted me to mention that the 2019 Fisheries Disaster Grant that Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama received quite a bit of money on. The state of Mississippi received $21 million from damages that were caused by the 2019 Bonnie Carey spillway openings. We are currently in consultation with NOAA on approval of our spend plan. We've been in consultation with them since November, since your last meeting, so hopefully we'll have some more updates at the next commission meeting. We are also, as other states are, awaiting the results of the red snapper interim analysis and how the great red snapper count will impact our catch levels so that we can set our 2021 red snapper season. He wanted me to let you know that the Department of Marine Resources is back in the office operating in full. And then I would also like to echo what Scott has said on the positive feedback on the tablets. Our staff seems to like them very much. And that's what I got.
Okay, Rick, thank you. Any questions? Moving on, Louisiana, Jason.
Thank you very much. Can y'all hear me fine?
Loud and clear.
All right, thank you. I know Jeff covered CARES Act real quick. I'll just add a little bit of extra detail that he didn't quite have in there. We are working through about 400 incomplete applications. We sent out final notices last week. And then on the 22nd of this month, we'll start making a final attempt via the phone, and they will have until the 29th of this month to resolve any issues with their applications, and we'll be able to move forward and finally get to that second round of payments eventually in the next month or so. We are in the process of lifting our moratorium on oyster leases in the state. We have a multi-phase process. We're currently in what we call phase 0. That's expected to conclude at the end of the third quarter of this year. It'll be the first time that we're issuing new leases in over a decade. Let's see, we've had quite an active artificial reef season. We've put, with the extra NERDA money we've put in 6 nearshore structures this past year. And we've got a few more scheduled coming up. Let's see. Good news on the blue crab side. Our recent stock assessment shows that we're not overfished or overfishing. In the past, we've been dealing with a few issues where we've been putting in some extra restrictions and regulations during the season, which our crab industry had requested multiple changes each of the 3 years that we had those restrictions in place. So this past harvest year, we have not had any. Things are kind of back to normal on the crab fishery. Let's see. We had the same problems everyone else had that Greg mentioned on the creel with COVID and everything else. The main impact for us has been not necessarily being able to complete assignments, but being able to actually identify, count, put our hands on fish dockside. Trying to keep distance from anglers prevents us from doing that. Let's see what else I have here. Excuse me, guys. I'm sorry. I'm going through my report here, trying to be quick about it. We've had a few life history studies that we had going on. We were working on sheep's head and black drum, and both of those got cut short due to the pandemic. We weren't able to collect enough data, so we're going to be reassessing those and trying to start those up again once things go back to normal. We had a southern flounder experimental gear study we were working on. We were trying to use a modified pike net to try and set up a new method of sampling. And we ran into some issues. We weren't really successful with some very long soak times, up to 72 hours. We were only catching about 3 flounder. In fact, I think that's the most we caught in one set for the 72 hours. So we're in the middle of reassessing that. We're trying a different gear. We're getting ready to launch that. We'll be launching that this fall, working with some modified hoop nets. What else? As you've known for the past few meetings, I've been expressing concern about our oyster stock. We actually saw an increase in this past assessment of 45%. However, the majority of that is attributed to an increase in Calcasieu Lake alone, which was a 145% increase from the previous assessment. East of the river, unfortunately, we saw a 7% decrease from the last assessment, which, as I mentioned before, is an all-time low estimated stock. So from that all-time low, we've had an additional 7% decrease on the east side of the river. So things are still not going too well over there. And lastly, I'll cover our oyster hatchery. It's been a rough season, to say the least, between COVID restrictions and being hit by 5 named storms. I think we had 6 storm closures at the hatchery this year. So trying to shut down and get back up and running again kind of puts a wrench into production. And we didn't have a very good year there. We were able to produce some, but again, the slowdowns due to COVID and the storms kind of put a big hamper on that. And that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Jason? If not, we'll move on to Texas. Robin?
Yeah, like the other folks have said here, much of the report would have been covered in other reports already, and realizing the time, I'll make this fairly brief. What I do want to do, though, is getting back to Doug's earlier question, want to try to frame up this freeze event just a little bit for you all in terms of what the impacts might really mean. Obviously, in this kind of event, whether it's a pollution event or a red tide or a freeze event, you know, the first step is to go out and measure that magnitude. And of course, this event started that weekend of almost a month ago now, or a little over a month ago, where Valentine's Day weekend, and really ran through for 4 or 5 days along the coast, kind of soaking in that cold weather. And so that extended time period, we did have quite a significant event. And to put that event in perspective a little bit, we do have these events every 4 to 6 years on the Texas coast since 1980. But this one is going to rank probably about third on the list in terms of total numbers of fish, and certainly the highest on the list when we see it in turtle strandings. When compared, this event compared to past events in 2017, Texas had the largest turtle stranding event it had ever had at that point in time, with about 3,700 turtles. And this event has now almost basically is 4 times that event in total number of turtles stranded. Unfortunately, Florida, we'd love to give you this record back, but you previously held the record of cold stunned turtles that from a 2010 event in your part of the world. And this event's almost going to double that event, or actually over doubling of that event, with about, again, y'all had, at least the count we had was 4,600 turtles, and this event's going to be closer to 12,800 turtles. The good news, as Laura had indicated, is that at least 4,000 of those have already been released alive. And of course, the department helps in both the rescue and recovery of those turtles, transport of those turtles to rehabbers, and then we also assisted in getting those turtles back out for release in the Gulf where we could. And when I say we, it's a joint effort between coastal fisheries and law enforcement. So both teams help out as much as we can, given the other needs that occur during a freeze event like that. Certainly that tugs on law enforcement's time during events like that. When we think about this in terms of fish, as I had indicated, 3.8 million total fish. When we think about the other really benchmark events that we've had along the coast, the 1983 freeze is the one that comes to mind for most people. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 14 million fish were killed in that event. And then we had 2 events, one in the February of '89 and then one in December of '89. And if you add those 2 events together, they were actually in total fish greater than that '83 event. We're considerably less than that in total fish, and mostly the impact occurs from Galveston Bay south, really Matagorda Bay starting and going south. The significant part of this event, though, is, Doug, as you had kind of alluded to, was that when we look at this event, though, when we think about the Laguna Madre, specifically game fish, spotted sea trout in the Laguna Madre, this event basically is only about 80% less than that 1983 event down in that part of the world. And I said 80% less, 20% less. It is about 80% of the magnitude of that event when we think of the Laguna Madre. And it's about 75% of those 2 combined 89 freezes. So it is a significant event. It's significant overall ecologically for those 90% of other species that are not game fish, but it's also significant for game fish, and especially significant when we think of the upper Laguna Madre and the lower Laguna Madre, and especially associated with spotted sea trout. So now, and really the moment we stop with the freeze event, we could start getting out again. The first goal was to assess the magnitude, and then immediately following that, with our creel sampling of anglers, with our bag veins and our bay trawls, our resource sampling, we would start to get information regarding what that really means moving forward. And more importantly, when we get to our gill net season coming up, we'll even know more. We're keeping our commission briefed. You know, obviously in some of these past events, there's been regulation changes that were either temporary or long term associated with them. That is not off the table at this point in time as we try to determine those impacts, and we're still doing that, and we'll be briefing our commission next week regarding this event. Really beyond the freeze event and the other things that have already been covered, that really concludes my report, Doug, and be happy to answer any questions. And I might add, as Laura indicated, the full report on magnitude is up on our website, and if anyone is interested in that they can certainly go there and get that report.
All right, Robin, thank you. Any questions for Robin?
I just have one comment to Robin, to your staff. I talked to some folks who helped with some of the turtle stuff, and I'm sure it was across the board with multiple people who did this, but like some of the game wardens, like they were out in some horrific conditions and were frustrated that they couldn't continue. Like they had their own stuff they should have been dealing with. So kudos to Texas Parks and Wildlife across the board. And again, any other agency that worked on the turtle thing. I heard some really great stories about the effort that people put into that, even at the peril of their own safety. So good job.
Well, we thank you for that, Scott. And yeah, it's a team effort, and a lot of people get out there and really hustle. And as you say, sometimes when they probably had water pipes that were frozen and they needed to be thawing and doing other things that they needed to get done at their own locations as well. But thank you for that, and I'll pass that on.
We had a lot of people on your staff and others who were wading around in water and single digit temperatures. And I want to thank you. I've heard a lot about how much effort they put forth. Any other questions for Robin? Okay, we're going to move on to item number 14, future meetings. Out there?
Yeah. So as we talked about, hopefully the October meeting will be an in-person meeting. We'll be talking with Dan in terms of trying to figure out a location in Florida. We were supposed to meet in Florida last October, but obviously that didn't happen. So we're gonna pick up with where we were supposed to meet. We initially had talked about the Keys, but we also may move it to the Panhandle. That's a little easier to travel, make it a little easier for folks. But we'll be working with Dan, and then our March meeting will in 2020 will be in Texas. Work with you and Robin and to figure out how or where we should meet at that time.
Okay. Thank you. Number 15, review of committee listings. Dave, is that you?
Yep, that's me. We implemented this several years ago where we've put together a listing by state for all the various committees. And it's just something that we put on the March agenda. So take a look at it and provide any updates or changes to Cheryl Noble on our staff, and we'll incorporate those. So that's all I got.
Okay. Move to item number 16, publications list and web statistics.
Again, I'll refer you to tab V and W in the briefing book. It's just a list. It's just a list of our various publications that and some of them, the older ones are not, but the recent ones are available online. And then the website stats, something Joe just keeps track of. Nothing, no major differences or changes. So just if you have any questions on publications, you can contact Debbie McIntyre. If you have any questions on the website, you can contact Joe Fair.
All right.
That's all I
Any
got there.
questions there? Any questions there for Dave? Pardon me. If not, other business, number 17. And Dave, you want to introduce the young fisherman update?
Yeah, I talked with Ashford a few weeks ago, and she said that they had made a little progress since the last time. I think it was at our I don't even remember, maybe last March in Orange Beach, where she gave an update, and she was wondering if it would be useful to provide a written update on some of the progress they've made. So she put together a letter and just kind of highlighted the updates. Laura under a Sea Grant report actually gave a good overview of some of the things that's been happening. I'd like to maybe for October invite Ashford so she can give a little more in-depth update on what's going on, and I would think that there'd be a little more progress by then as well. So it's just more informational. And if you have any questions, I believe Ashford was on, and yeah, she's still on. So if you guys have any specific questions, you can ask just ask Ashford. You're muted, Doug.
Thank you. I was muted. Any questions? And Dave, are you going to have that on the website, that letter?
No, we don't usually post stuff like that on the website, but I mean,
Okay.
I emailed it out to everybody, so.
Okay, that's good. All right, hearing no questions, any items under other business at this point? Okay, hearing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
This is Reed, so moved.
Okay, got a second? Any opposition to adjourning? Well, I wish we were all together and could go click a glass.
Yeah.
But
amen to that.
Yeah, since we can't, we are officially adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. And Dave, thank you and your staff. I think this went very, very well. I'm impressed.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You did a great job.
All right, group. See y'all later.
See you. Bye.